I showed up to my wife's lavish birthday party that I paid for, only to see everyone laughing and walking out of the venue. Mr. Always showing up late. Then my wife and her office lover walked out holding hands. Oh, you didn't get my text? You were not invited. So I walked away, quietly canceled every payment, party, trip, and pulled out my 90% company share $157 million worth. Minutes later, my phone lit up with 156 missed calls, and someone showed up at my door. You know that feeling when you're about to walk into what you think is going to be the highlight of your evening, only to discover you're actually the punchline of someone else's joke? Yeah, well, welcome to my Tuesday night in downtown Manhattan, where I learned that apparently being fashionably late to your own wife's birthday party isn't fashionable at all. It's just pathetic. I pulled up to the Meridian Ballroom in my Tesla, the kind of place that makes your wallet cry just from the valet parking fees. Crystal chandeliers hanging like expensive tears from a 20-foot ceiling, marble floors so polished you could probably perform surgery on them, and doormen who looked like they moonlighted as Secret Service agents. This wasn't just any venue. This was the venue, the kind of place where Manhattan's elite came to pretend they were royalty for a few hours. And guess who dropped a cool 50 grand to rent it out for the night? That's right, yours truly, the guy who was apparently about to become the evening's entertainment. I'd been stuck in that godforsaken conference room until 9:30, listening to a bunch of Japanese investors drone on about quarterly projections and market penetration strategies. You'd think after building a tech company from the ground up, I'd have learned to delegate this stuff. But no, apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. I kept checking my watch, knowing Clara's party started at 8, but these guys flew in from Tokyo specifically for this meeting. What was I supposed to do? Tell them to reschedule, because my wife wanted to blow out some candles. So there I was, hustling down Fifth Avenue in my best Tom Ford suit, clutching a Tiffany box with Clara's birthday present inside, a vintage Cartier necklace that cost more than most people's cars. I was already rehearsing my apology speech. You know the drill. Sorry, babe, work ran late. But I'm here now and ready to celebrate the most amazing woman in Manhattan. Classic husband damage control. But as I approached the ballroom's entrance, something felt off. People were streaming out of the building like they were fleeing a fire drill, except they were all laughing and chatting like they'd just had the time of their lives. I checked my phone. It was barely 10 o'clock. What kind of birthday party ends at 10 on a Tuesday? Clara's crowd usually partied until the cleaning crew started giving them dirty looks. That's when I heard it. Well, look who finally decided to grace us with his presence. I turned to see Jessica Hartwell, one of Clara's society friends, strutting past me in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. She had that particular smirk that rich women perfect in boarding school, the one that says, I know something you don't, and I'm going to enjoy watching you figure it out. Mr. Always showing up late, she continued, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. How perfectly on brand. Her little entourage giggled like she'd just delivered the comedic performance of the century. My stomach dropped faster than the stock market in 2008. I pushed through the revolving doors into the lobby, and that's when I saw them. Clara, my wife of 8 years, the woman I'd built an empire with, standing there in a silver dress that caught the light like liquid mercury. She looked absolutely stunning, which somehow made what happened next even worse. She was holding hands with Adrian Blackstone, her supposedly just a colleague from the marketing department. You know, the guy with the perfectly styled hair and the kind of jawline that makes other men question their life choices. Clara saw me, and, I swear to God, she actually smirked. Not smiled, not looked surprised or embarrassed, or even guilty. She smirked like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. Oh, honey, she said, her voice carrying that fake concern that women use when they're about to deliver a knockout punch. Didn't you get my text? You weren't actually invited to this party. Let me tell you something about texts from your wife. When she says she sent one and you didn't get it, she's lying. I checked my phone right there in front of everyone, scrolling through our message history like some desperate loser looking for breadcrumbs of his own marriage. Nothing. Not a single message since yesterday morning when she'd reminded me to pick up her dry cleaning. Adrian stepped forward, and I could practically see the guy preening like a peacock who'd just discovered he had the biggest tail feathers in the zoo. Sorry, man, he said. but his grin suggested he was about as sorry as a kid who'd just gotten away with putting gum in the teacher's hair. Tonight's just for Clara's real friends. Real friends. Like I hadn't been bankrolling this woman's lifestyle for the better part of a decade. The lobby was still buzzing with her guests, and I could feel their eyes on me like I was some kind of zoo exhibit. Ladies and gentlemen, feast your eyes on the husband who thought he was invited to his own wife's birthday party. I could practically hear the commentary in my head. Some of them looked embarrassed for me, which somehow made it worse. There's nothing quite like pity from people you've been buying drinks for at charity galas for years. Clara adjusted her purse, a Hermes bag I'd bought her for Christmas, and took Adrian's arm like they were posing for some twisted version of a wedding photo. Thanks for paying for everything, though, she added, her voice as casual as if she was thanking me for holding a door. The flowers were gorgeous, and the champagne was absolutely divine. Cristal really does make everything more special. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision. This wasn't Clara suddenly deciding to exclude me because of some random argument we'd had. This was planned, orchestrated. She'd let me pay for the entire party, the venue, the food, the flowers, the band, the premium bar service, knowing full well she was going to humiliate me in front of everyone we knew. I was like some kind of unwitting financier to my own public execution. Adrian leaned in and whispered something in her ear that made her laugh, the kind of laugh she used to give me back when we were building the company together, back when we were a team instead of whatever this toxic mess had become. They brushed past me like I was invisible, like I was just another piece of furniture in this overpriced lobby. And you know what the worst part was? I didn't say anything. I didn't demand an explanation, didn't ask why, didn't even tell them what I really thought about their little performance. I just stood there like an idiot, watching my wife walk away with another man after spending my money on a party I wasn't welcome at. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to do something, say something, make some kind of scene that would at least preserve a shred of my dignity. But instead, I turned on my heel and walked away. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to give people the reaction they're expecting. They wanted drama, tears, maybe some kind of public meltdown they could gossip about for months. Instead, they got nothing. Just a man in an expensive suit walking away with his dignity intact, even if his marriage was apparently circling the drain. As I handed my ticket to the valet, I couldn't help but think about the irony of the whole situation. I'd built a tech company worth hundreds of millions, survived boardroom battles that would make Game of Thrones look like a children's tea party, and negotiated deals with some of the shrewdest investors on Wall Street. But apparently, I couldn't even navigate my own marriage without walking face first into a humiliation that would probably be the talk of Manhattan's social scene for weeks. The valet brought my car around, and as I tipped him $20, I caught a glimpse of myself in the side mirror. I looked exactly like what I was. A successful businessman who'd just discovered that success in the boardroom doesn't automatically translate to success in the bedroom. Or in this case, success in not getting publicly dumped at your own wife's birthday party that you paid for. But as I drove through the neon-lit streets of Manhattan, something started brewing in my chest that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite sadness. It was something colder, more calculating. Something that reminded me why I'd been so good at building a company from nothing in the first place. Clara wanted to play games? Fine. But she'd just made one crucial mistake. She'd forgotten who actually held all the cards in this relationship. Time to remind her. You ever have one of those nights where you come home and suddenly your own penthouse feels like a crime scene? Yeah, that was me at 11:30 p.m., standing in my marble-floored foyer, still wearing the suit I'd planned to charm investors in. Except now it felt more like armor after a battle I didn't even know I was fighting. The elevator ride up to the 42nd floor had been the longest 90 seconds of my life. I kept replaying Clara's smirk, Adrian's cocky grin, the way her friends had looked at me like I was some kind of pathetic joke they'd been waiting months to laugh at. But you know what really got me? The sheer audacity of it all. The woman had literally used my credit card to humiliate me. It was like paying someone to punch you in the face and then saying thank you. I loosened my tie, a silk Hermes number that Clara had bought me for our anniversary last year, back when she still pretended to care about keeping up appearances, and headed straight for my home office. This room was my sanctuary, the one place in our shared space that was purely mine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, a desk made from reclaimed teak that cost more than most people's annual salary, and enough high-tech gadgets to make Tony Stark jealous. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, I was here for one thing. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the one with the biometric lock that only recognized my fingerprint, and pulled out a black leather folder. Not just any folder. This baby was thick as a phone book and labeled in gold embossing. Primary assets. I'd been maintaining this thing for years, updating it quarterly like some kind of obsessive accountant, and right now I was thanking my paranoid past self for being such a meticulous record keeper. See, here's what most people don't understand about successful marriages in Manhattan. They're basically business partnerships with better tax benefits and shared real estate. And like any smart businessman, I'd kept receipts. Lots and lots of receipts. I spread the contents across my desk like I was dealing cards for the world's most expensive poker game. First up, the corporate structure documents. Beautiful, boring legal paperwork that told a very simple story. I own 90% of Clarigen Technologies, the AI startup we'd built together. Clara might have been the face of the company, doing TED Talks and magazine interviews, but I was the guy who'd actually written the algorithms, secured the patents, and convinced venture capitalists to throw money at us like we were printing gold. The funny thing about being the quiet partner in a power couple is that everyone assumes you're just along for the ride. Clara had done such a good job playing the brilliant CEO role that half of Manhattan probably thought I was some kind of trophy husband. Little did they know that every line of code, every strategic decision, every major investor meeting had my fingerprints all over it. I was like the wizard behind the curtain, except instead of running Oz, I was running a company worth $300 million. Next in the pile, financial documents that would make an IRS agent weep with joy. Bank statements showing every transfer I'd made to Clara's personal accounts over the past 3 years. And let me tell you, those numbers were eye-watering. We're talking about $200,000 a month in living expenses that somehow included weekly spa treatments, a personal trainer who charged more than most lawyers, and enough designer clothes to stock a small boutique. Then there were the travel receipts. Oh, the travel receipts. First-class flights to Paris, Milan, Tokyo, all charged to my American Express Black Card. Hotel suites at the Four Seasons that cost more per night than most people's rent. Private jets for weekend getaways that Clara insisted were essential for networking. I'd been bankrolling her lifestyle like some kind of financial sugar daddy, and she'd been living it up while apparently planning to kick me out of my own life. But the real kicker? The invoices from tonight's party. Every single expense, meticulously documented because that's how you run a business and apparently how you run a marriage when your wife treats both like her personal piggy bank. The venue rental, $12,000. The catering, $18,000 for food that probably cost $3 to make. The floral arrangements, $8,000 for flowers that would be dead by morning. The premium bar service, $15,000 for top-shelf liquor that I wasn't even allowed to drink. I pulled out my calculator, and old-school Texas instruments that I'd had since college, because sometimes you need something tangible when you're dealing with numbers that feel too surreal to be real. $53,000. That's what Clara's little humiliation party had cost me. 53 grand for the privilege of being publicly dumped by my own wife in front of half of Manhattan's social elite. And let's talk about that guest list for a hot minute. I recognized most of the faces streaming out of that ballroom. And you know what they all had in common? They were people who'd benefited from my generosity over the years. Investment opportunities I'd shared, charity galas I'd sponsored, business connections I'd facilitated. These weren't Clara's friends. They were people who'd been networking with my money and my influence for years. Jessica Hartwell, the woman who delivered that delightful Mr. Always Showing Up Late singer, her husband's construction company had gotten a $1 million contract through connections I'd made. The Berkowitz couple who'd been laughing as they walked past me, I'd personally recommended them for membership at the country club where they spent every weekend. Even that smug investment banker whose name I couldn't remember, but whose face screamed, I peaked in prep school. I'd thrown business his way that probably bought him his summer house in the Hamptons. I sat back in my leather chair, the kind that cost more than most people's cars, and stared at the evidence spread before me. It was like looking at a financial autopsy of my marriage. Every receipt, every bank transfer, every investment told the same story. I'd been funding my own irrelevance for years. But here's the thing about being a successful entrepreneur. You don't get there by accepting bad deals, and you definitely don't get there by letting people walk all over you. Sure, I'd been blindsided tonight, caught completely off guard by Clara's little power play. But now I was in my element. This was just another business problem that needed solving, another challenge that required strategic thinking and cold, hard numbers. I opened my laptop and started pulling up account information. Corporate credit cards, travel accounts, investment portfolios. All the financial threads that held Clara's lifestyle together. It was like looking at a spider web, except instead of catching flies, this web had been catching my money for years while I'd been too busy building our empire to notice how much of it was flowing in one direction. The humiliation from tonight was already crystallizing into something much more useful: resolve. Pure, undiluted determination. Clara wanted to erase me from her public life? Fine. But she'd just made one catastrophic miscalculation. She'd forgotten that in this relationship, I wasn't just the guy who showed up late to parties. I was the guy who paid for them. I was the guy who made them possible in the first place. And if she thought she could use my money to humiliate me and then walk away hand in hand with her office boyfriend like nothing had happened, well, she was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between being married to someone and actually owning them. I reached for my phone and started scrolling through my banking apps. Time to see just how much Clara's newfound independence was really worth without my financial backing. Spoiler alert, it wasn't going to be nearly as much as she thought. The folder sat open on my desk like a roadmap to revenge, and for the first time since walking into that ballroom, I started to smile. Not a happy smile. This was something colder, more calculated. This was the smile of a man who'd just realized he'd been playing checkers while everyone else thought they were playing chess. Game on, Clara. Game on. So here's the thing about having a photographic memory for passwords and account numbers. It comes in real handy when you're planning to systematically dismantle someone's entire financial universe at midnight on a Tuesday. I cracked my knuckles like some kind of digital hitman and fired up my laptop. Time for Clara to learn that actions have consequences, and consequences have price tags. First stop, Wanderlust Premium Travel Services, the concierge company that handled all of Clara's business trips. And by business trips, I mean romantic getaways disguised as professional development opportunities. I logged into the corporate account using credentials I'd memorized years ago when I was still naive enough to think transparency was a two-way street in our marriage. There it was, sitting in the pending reservations folder like a neon sign advertising my wife's infidelity. A 2-week trip to the Maldives, scheduled for next month. The Four Seasons private island, no less. Ocean villa with infinity pool, private butler service, couple spa treatments, and a price tag that would make a Saudi prince think twice. $120,000 for what the booking notes described as a romantic celebration getaway for two. The guest names? Clara Henderson Blackstone and Adrian Blackstone. Apparently, they'd already started hyphenating their names like some kind of twisted power couple. How thoughtful of them to plan their honeymoon on my dime while I was busy actually working for a living. I clicked cancel reservation with the same satisfaction most people get from popping bubble wrap. The system asked if I was sure I wanted to forfeit the 50% deposit. Oh, I was sure. I was so sure I could probably teach a masterclass in certainty. Watching that confirmation screen flash, reservation successfully canceled, was better than winning the lottery. Actually, it was better than winning the lottery because I was about to save $120,000 instead of just making money. But why stop there? I was just getting warmed up. Next target, the birthday party invoices. You'd think that after getting publicly humiliated at an event I'd paid for, the vendors would have at least had the decency to wait a few days before trying to cash their checks. But no, capitalism waits for no one's emotional recovery. I had 3 pending payments sitting in my business account, just waiting to be processed. Prestige catering services, $18,000 for food that I'd watched other people eat while being told I wasn't invited to consume it. Sterling floral design, $8,000 for arrangements that had probably already been thrown in the trash. Meridian Ballroom, $12,000 for the privilege of renting a space where my wife could publicly destroy me. Click, click, click. Stop payment on all 3. The banking system even asked me to provide a reason for each cancellation. I typed services not rendered as agreed, with the kind of petty satisfaction that probably wasn't healthy, but felt absolutely fantastic in the moment. Now here's where things got interesting. I pulled up Clara's corporate credit card account, the Platinum American Express that I'd gotten her when she became the public face of our company. This wasn't just any credit card. This was the kind of plastic that opened doors, got you into exclusive restaurants without reservations, and basically served as a golden ticket to the lifestyle Clara had become accustomed to. The transaction history read like a diary of denial. Bergdorf Goodman, for $1,000 last Tuesday. Apparently, finding the perfect outfit for publicly dumping your husband requires premium shopping. Lou Bernardine, $800 for dinner for two last Friday. Guess who wasn't the plus one for that romantic evening? A jewelry store in Soho, $12,000 for something called promise rings. I nearly choked on my coffee. Promise rings. For her and Adrian. Bought with my money. I called the credit card company's Platinum customer service line, the one that connects you directly to a human being who actually speaks English and doesn't make you navigate through 17 different menu options. This is Marcus Henderson, I said to the representative who answered on the second ring. I need to immediately suspend card number ending in 7843. Certainly, Mr. Henderson. May I ask the reason for the suspension? Unauthorized usage by a non-account holder. Technically true, since adultery wasn't exactly authorized when I'd added Clara as a user on the account. The card has been suspended, sir. Is there anything else I can help you with tonight? Actually, yes. I want to see a detailed breakdown of every transaction from the past 6 months. 20 minutes later, I was staring at a PDF that read like a financial thriller novel. $237,000 in 6 months. That's almost 40 grand a month that Clara had been spending like she was trying to single-handedly stimulate the economy. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, luxury spa treatments, and enough jewelry to open her own Tiffany store. But the real masterpiece was yet to come. I logged into Clarigen Technologies' corporate banking system, the nerve center of our $300 million empire. This was where the serious money lived, where investor funds sat waiting to be deployed, where payroll got processed, where the magic happened that kept our 150 employees fed and our shareholders happy. I pulled up the main operational account, the one that held our working capital. $157 million, just sitting there like a dragon's hoard waiting for someone brave enough to claim it. This money represented years of grinding, of 18-hour days, of convincing skeptical investors that our AI technology was going to change the world. This money was the lifeblood of everything Clara had built her public persona around. And legally speaking, 90% of it belonged to me. I navigated to the transfer controls, the section of the banking system that only someone with my level of access could reach. The screen showed options for moving money between accounts, setting up automatic payments, and, most importantly for tonight's purposes, freezing funds. There was a little drop-down menu that said reason for freeze, with options like audit review, legal hold, and executive override. I selected executive override because, well, I was the chief executive and I was definitely overriding some things tonight. The system asked me to confirm the amount I wanted to freeze. I typed in $157 million, and for a moment, I just stared at those numbers on the screen. This wasn't just money, this was power. This was the ability to make or break not just Clara's lifestyle, but the livelihoods of everyone who worked for us. This was the nuclear option in corporate warfare. But you know what? Clara had fired the first shot when she decided to humiliate me in front of everyone we knew. She'd chosen to treat our marriage like a hostile takeover. So now she was going to learn what a real hostile takeover looked like. I clicked Confirm Freeze. The screen went blank for about 3 seconds, 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours, and then a message appeared. Funding pool locked. Access restricted to primary account holder only. Below that, in smaller text, this action has been logged and all authorized users have been notified via automated email. The click of that mouse felt better than any revenge speech I could have given at the party. It felt better than screaming, better than throwing things, better than any dramatic confrontation Clara had probably been expecting. This was clean, professional, and absolutely devastating. I leaned back in my chair and imagined the chaos that was about to unfold. Clara's phone would be buzzing with notifications about failed payment processing. The company's CFO would be getting automated alerts about frozen accounts. Our investors would start asking very pointed questions about why their money had suddenly become inaccessible. The payroll department would panic when they tried to process tomorrow's automatic deposits and got error messages instead. And the best part? It was all perfectly legal. I wasn't stealing anything, wasn't breaking any laws, wasn't even technically breaching any contracts. I was simply exercising my rights as the majority shareholder and primary account holder. If Clara wanted to run the company without me, she was welcome to try. But she'd be doing it without my money. I poured myself 3 fingers of Macallan 25, the good stuff that I kept in my office for closing big deals, and raised the glass in a toast to my empty penthouse. Here's to learning the difference between being married to someone and actually owning them, I said out loud. Because sometimes you need to hear your own voice to believe what you're doing is real. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails. I glanced at the screen and saw Clara's name flashing like a neon emergency signal. Then Adrian's number. Then half a dozen executives from the company. I turned the phone face down and took another sip of whiskey. They could all wait until morning. Tonight was about establishing new rules for a game Clara thought she'd already won. She wanted to play in the big leagues? Welcome to the major leagues, sweetheart. Population me. I spent the next hour going through every shared account, every joint credit line, every financial entanglement that connected Clara's lifestyle to my bank account. It was like performing surgery with a calculator, carefully severing each connection that had been funding my own humiliation. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 hours ago, I'd been rushing to her party with a Cartier necklace, worried about being late and disappointing her. Now I was systematically dismantling the financial infrastructure that made her public life possible. It's amazing how quickly love can turn into strategy when someone shows you exactly how little you mean to them. By the time I finished, it was almost 2 in the morning. Manhattan was quiet except for the occasional taxi, honking 42 floors below. I looked out at the city lights, at all those windows representing other people's lives, other people's problems, other people's marriages that maybe weren't complete disasters. Tomorrow was going to be interesting. Tomorrow, Clara was going to wake up to a world where her credit cards didn't work, her travel plans had vanished, and the company she thought she controlled had suddenly become a very expensive paperweight. Tomorrow, she was going to learn that there's a big difference between being the face of a company and actually owning it. I closed the folder and locked it back in the drawer. The evidence would stay safe, just in case I needed to remind anyone how this particular game got started. But for now, I had a feeling the real fun was just beginning. You know what they say about the calm before the storm? Well, apparently the storm after the calm sounds like a phone that won't stop buzzing at 6 in the goddamn morning. I woke up to what can only be described as a digital apocalypse. My iPhone lighting up like a Christmas tree having an epileptic seizure, vibrating so hard it was practically doing the Macarena across my nightstand. I rolled over, squinting at the screen through eyes that felt like they'd been marinated in single malt scotch. 53 missed calls. 53. In the 3 hours I'd managed to sleep, half of Manhattan had apparently discovered that their favorite piggy bank had suddenly grown a spine and learned how to say no. The caller ID list read like a who's who of people I really didn't want to talk to before noon. Clara, 14 calls. Adrian, 8 calls, which was adorable considering he didn't even officially work for us anymore. Our company's CFO Richard Steinberg, 12 calls, and knowing Richard, he was probably having a coronary in his Park Avenue office. And various board members whose names I recognized, but whose actual jobs I'd never been entirely clear about. But here's the beautiful thing about being the guy who holds all the cards. You get to decide when the game starts. I turned my phone to silent, made myself a cup of Ethiopian coffee that cost more per pound than most people spend on groceries, and settled into my morning routine like it was any other Wednesday. Shower, shave, check the markets, read the Wall Street Journal, pretend that I wasn't currently engaged in financial warfare with my own wife. The peaceful morning lasted exactly until 11:15, when my doorman called to inform me that there was a very distressed young woman in the lobby who claimed she worked for Mrs. Henderson and desperately needed to speak with me. I almost told him to send her away, but curiosity got the better of me. Plus, I figured it might be entertaining to hear exactly how badly my little financial coup had disrupted Clara's perfectly orchestrated world. 5 minutes later, there was a knock on my door that sounded like someone was trying to beat it down with their bare hands. I opened it to find Rena Martinez, Clara's personal assistant, looking like she'd been put through a blender and then reassembled by someone who'd lost the instruction manual. Her usually immaculate hair was disheveled, her designer blouse was wrinkled, and she had the kind of dark circles under her eyes that suggested she'd been up all night dealing with what I imagined was a fairly spectacular meltdown. "Mr. Henderson," she gasped, like she'd just run a marathon instead of taking the elevator up 42 floors. "Thank God you're here." They're all losing their minds. Complete, total, certifiable insanity. I leaned against the doorframe, savoring the moment like a fine wine. "Define they, Rena. And maybe start with why you look like you've been through a natural disaster." She pushed past me into the apartment, which would have been rude under normal circumstances, but these weren't exactly normal circumstances. "The entire company is in chaos," she blurted out, turning to face me with the kind of wild-eyed desperation you usually see in disaster movies. "Payroll's frozen, the investor meeting got canceled because the presentation budget is locked, and half the department heads are threatening to quit because they can't access their project funds." I poured myself another cup of coffee, taking my sweet time with the cream and sugar. "Sounds like a management problem to me." "The credit card got declined at Starbucks," she continued, like this was somehow the most tragic part of the whole situation. "Clara sent me to get coffee for the emergency board meeting, and her corporate card got declined buying a $12 latte." "A $12 latte, Mr. Henderson." The barista looked at me like I was some kind of deadbeat. Now that was a mental image I could savor. Clara, the woman who'd spent $40,000 a month like it was monopoly money, getting her credit card declined over a cup of overpriced coffee. If that wasn't poetic justice, I didn't know what was. "And the Maldives trip," Rena went on, apparently not done cataloging the disasters. "The travel agent called this morning saying the reservation was canceled and they're keeping the deposit." Clara screamed so loud I thought the windows were going to shatter. I mean, literally screamed. Like, horror movie-level screaming. I sat down in my favorite leather chair, the one that faced the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. "Rena, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. What, exactly, do you think I should do about any of this?" She stared at me like I'd just asked her to explain quantum physics in interpretive dance. "Well, you could, fix it, turn everything back on." Clara told everyone that this was just some kind of technical glitch and that you'd have it sorted out by this afternoon. I actually laughed out loud at that one. "A technical glitch? Is that what she's calling it?" "She said you two had a little spat, but that you'd never actually hurt the company over something personal." Rena's voice was getting smaller, like she was starting to realize that maybe Clara's confidence had been wildly misplaced. "She told the board that married couples fight all the time and that you'd come to your senses once you cooled down." "Come to my senses," I repeated slowly, tasting each word like it was a particularly bitter medicine. "Interesting perspective. Tell me, Rena, were you at the party last night?" She nodded, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Yes, sir. It was a beautiful event. The flowers were gorgeous, and the champagne was amazing, and did you happen to notice that I wasn't there?" Her face went through about 15 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds, finally settling on something that looked like she'd just realized she was standing in a minefield. I thought maybe you were running late from work." "I wasn't running late, Rena. I was uninvited. To a party that I paid for. By my wife, who spent the evening holding hands with her boyfriend. Do you see where I'm going with this?" The color drained from her face faster than water down a sink. Oh shit. "Oh, Mr. Henderson, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that Clara had publicly humiliated me using my own money." "Yeah, most people didn't realize that. Funny how that works." She stood there for a moment, apparently trying to process the fact that this wasn't just some random marital squabble that would blow over by dinner time. This was full-scale nuclear warfare, and Clara had just discovered that she'd brought a water gun to a missile fight. What will it take?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "To fix this, I mean. To get everything back to normal." I set down my coffee cup and really looked at her for the first time since she'd arrived. Rena was a good kid, 26, fresh out of Columbia Business School, sharp as a tack, and unfortunately caught in the crossfire of a marriage that had just exploded in spectacular fashion. None of this was her fault, but she was about to become collateral damage in Clara's war against reality. Normal, I said, standing up and walking to the window. Rena, sweetheart, there is no normal anymore. Normal died last night when your boss decided to treat me like hired help at my own expense. But surely there's something. Oh, there's definitely something, I interrupted, turning back to face her. But it's not going to be what Clara wants to hear. See, your boss made a fundamental miscalculation. She thought she could humiliate me and then just carry on with business as usual. She thought I'd be so desperate to avoid a public divorce scandal that I'd quietly accept being turned into Manhattan's most expensive cuckold. Rena winced at the word cuckold, but I was just getting started. The problem is, Clara forgot something crucial in all her planning. She forgot that I'm not just her husband. I'm not just the guy who pays for her lifestyle. I'm the guy who built the empire she's been playing queen of. And empires belong to the people who build them, not the people who pose for pictures in front of them. I walked over to my desk and pulled out a piece of paper, expensive letterhead that I'd had printed years ago but never actually used. I'm going to write down exactly what it's going to take to resolve this situation. And you're going to deliver it to Clara personally. Not email, not text, not carrier pigeon. You're going to hand it to her and watch her read every single word. What kind of terms? Rena asked, though she looked like she really didn't want to know the answer. The kind that are going to teach your boss the difference between being married to someone and actually owning them, I said, picking up my fountain pen. The kind that are going to remind her that actions have consequences, and consequences have price tags. I started writing, and with each word, I could practically feel the balance of power shifting back to where it belonged. Clara wanted to play games? Fine, but she'd just learned that some games have rules, and some rules have teeth. You have 24 hours. I told Rena as I folded the paper and slid it into an envelope. Not 24 hours and 1 minute. Not whenever Clara gets around to it. 24 hours exactly, or everything I froze last night becomes permanent. Rena took the envelope like it was a live grenade, which, in a way, it was. And if she doesn't agree? I smiled, but it wasn't a particularly friendly smile. Then she's going to discover that building a tech empire is a lot harder than inheriting one. And that Manhattan society parties are a lot less fun when you can't afford to throw them. She left without another word, clutching that envelope like it contained the nuclear launch codes. Which, in a sense, it did. I watched her go, then poured myself a celebratory scotch even though it wasn't even noon yet. The storm was just getting started, and I was finally enjoying the weather. You know what's funny about revenge? Most people think it's this hot, passionate thing. All screaming and dramatic confrontations, and throwing expensive objects at walls. But real revenge, the kind that actually works, is cold as a winter morning in Alaska and twice as calculating. Real revenge is sitting down with a cup of premium coffee and a legal pad, methodically crafting the kind of document that's going to make your cheating wife's life very, very complicated. I spent the better part of 3 hours that afternoon in my home office, drafting what I like to think of as Clara's new reality check. The apartment was dead quiet except for the scratch of my fountain pen on paper and the occasional siren from the street below, background music for the systematic dismantling of someone's entire world. See, here's what Clara hadn't figured out yet. I wasn't some scorned husband having an emotional breakdown. I was a businessman who'd just discovered that his biggest investment had gone bad, and now it was time to cut losses and restructure the deal. This wasn't about hurt feelings or wounded pride anymore. This was about demonstrating to everyone involved exactly who held the real power in this relationship. The document I was crafting wasn't just a list of demands. It was a masterclass in corporate warfare disguised as a marital agreement. Every clause was designed to systematically strip away the illusions Clara had been living under while ensuring that I came out of this mess not just intact, but stronger than before. Term number 1 was simple and devastating. Clara resigns as CEO of Clarigen Technologies, effective immediately. No transition period, no graceful handoff, no saving face in front of the board. Just pack up your motivational posters and your overpriced ergonomic chair and get the hell out of the executive suite that I'd basically bought and paid for. The beautiful irony was that she'd built her entire public persona around being this brilliant tech CEO, but without my money and my algorithms backing her up, she was about as qualified to run a tech company as I was to perform brain surgery. I could already picture the board meeting where she'd have to announce this little development. All those investors who'd been charmed by her TED Talks and magazine interviews were about to discover that the Empress had no clothes, and more importantly, no actual technical skills or business acumen to speak of. Clara was great at playing CEO for the cameras, but when it came to the nuts and bolts of actually running a company, she was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Term number 2 was even more satisfying. Adrian Blackstone's immediate termination with zero severance package. Not a golden parachute, not a transitional consulting fee, not even a decent reference letter. Just a security escort to clean out his desk and a permanent blacklist from every company in our professional network. The guy wanted to play house with my wife? Fine, but he could do it while updating his LinkedIn profile and explaining to future employers why his last job ended so abruptly. I made a mental note to personally ensure that Adrian's termination was handled with maximum humiliation. Maybe have security show up during lunch when the whole marketing department could watch him pack his personal items into a cardboard box. Maybe schedule it right before the quarterly all-hands meeting so everyone could speculate about why the golden boy was suddenly persona non grata. The possibilities were endless and equally entertaining. Term number 3 was where things got really interesting. I would be taking 2 permanent board seats, including one specifically designated as Financial Oversight Director. This wasn't just about having a voice in company decisions. This was about making sure that every dollar that flowed through Clarigen Technologies would have to pass through my approval first. Clara wanted to run a company? Great. But she'd be doing it with me watching every financial move she made like a hawk circling a particularly juicy rabbit. The Financial Oversight Director position was my own creation, a little constitutional amendment to our corporate structure that would give me veto power over any expenditure above $10,000. Want to hire a new marketing team? Better run it by me first. Planning a company retreat to some exotic location? Hope you've got a really good business justification ready. Thinking about giving yourself a raise? That's going to be a hard no from me, sweetheart. But the real masterpiece was term number 4. Clara would personally repay the company $157 million in structured installments over 3 years with zero interest, but only if she complied with every single clause of the agreement. This wasn't just about getting my money back. This was about creating a financial sword of Damocles hanging over her head for the next 36 months. The beauty of this particular clause was its psychological warfare potential. Every month for 3 years, Clara would have to write a check that reminded her exactly how much her little adultery adventure had cost her. Every payment would be a fresh humiliation, a monthly dose of reality about what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you premium dog food. And if she violated any part of the agreement, if she badmouthed me in public, if she tried to undermine my authority, if she so much as gave me a dirty look during a board meeting, the entire $157 million would become immediately due in full. Good luck explaining that cash flow problem to your accountant, Clara. I added a few additional clauses just for the sheer entertainment value. Clara would be required to issue a public statement acknowledging my role in building the company and apologizing for her errors in judgment. The press release would go out to every tech publication, every business journal, and every society blog that had ever written a puff piece about Manhattan's power couple. Let's see how her personal brand recovered from that little dose of honesty. She'd also be banned from using the company jet for personal travel, stripped of her corporate credit cards, and required to seek written approval for any media appearances or speaking engagements. Basically, I was turning her from a CEO into a very expensive intern with anger management issues. The final clause was my personal favorite, a non-disclosure agreement that prohibited Clara from discussing our marriage, our divorce proceedings, or any details about our business relationship with anyone outside of our immediate legal teams. This wasn't just about protecting my privacy. This was about making sure that Clara couldn't spin this story to make herself look like the victim. No crying to reporters about how mean her husband was being. No sympathy interviews about the challenges of being a woman in tech. No book deals about surviving corporate betrayal. I read through the document one more time, checking for loopholes or ambiguities that a smart lawyer might exploit. It was airtight, comprehensive, and absolutely devastating. Clara was about to learn that there's a big difference between being married to a tech mogul and actually being one yourself. The clock on my desk showed 4:47 p.m. I'd spent nearly 4 hours crafting this particular piece of legal poetry, and every minute had been worth it. This wasn't just a settlement agreement. This was a complete restructuring of Clara's entire existence, designed to remind her daily that actions have consequences and that some people are a lot better at playing hardball than others. I folded the document carefully and slid it into a manila envelope, then called down to my doorman. Patrick, could you have someone pick up an envelope for delivery? It needs to go to the Clarigen Technologies office building, 43rd floor, attention Clara Henderson. Hand delivery only, signature required. Of course, Mr. Henderson. Anything else? Yeah, I said, looking out at the Manhattan skyline where somewhere in a glass tower, my soon-to-be ex-wife was probably having the worst day of her professional life. Tell them it's urgent. As I sealed the envelope, I couldn't help but smile. Clara had spent last night thinking she'd won some kind of victory by humiliating me in public. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd confused tactics with strategy. Sure, she'd gotten her moment of triumph, her little power play in front of all her society friends. But I was about to show her the difference between winning a battle and winning a war. And this war? This war was going to be absolutely epic. You know that moment when you're enjoying a perfectly good evening of watching your enemies squirm from a distance, and then reality decides to come knocking on your door? Literally knocking, in this case, at exactly 11:03 p.m. on what had otherwise been a spectacularly satisfying Thursday night. I'd spent the evening doing what any reasonable person would do after delivering a corporate death sentence to his cheating wife, drinking expensive scotch and reading the Wall Street Journal like nothing had happened. My phone had been buzzing all day with increasingly frantic calls from various board members, investors, and what I assumed were Clara's flying monkeys, but I'd maintained radio silence like a submarine captain in enemy waters. The beauty of having the nuclear codes to your own company is that everyone else can panic while you sit back and enjoy the show. I'd been imagining Clara's day, trying to explain to increasingly skeptical investors why the company's operational funds had suddenly become inaccessible, fielding calls from vendors whose payments had bounced, and probably downing enough Xanax to tranquilize a rhinoceros. So when that knock came, not the polite tap of a neighbor or the professional rap of a doorman, but the desperate, urgent pounding of someone who'd reached the end of their rope, I knew exactly who it was before I even looked through the peephole. Clara stood in my hallway looking like she'd been put through an industrial washing machine and hung out to dry on a highway. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled in a way that screamed, expensive salon visit gone horribly wrong. Her makeup was smudged like she'd been crying for hours, and she was wearing what looked suspiciously like the same clothes from yesterday. The woman who'd never been seen in public without looking like she'd stepped off the cover of Forbes was standing at my door, looking like a refugee from her own life. I opened the door slowly, savoring the moment like a fine wine. Well, look who decided to pay me a visit. Did you lose your way to Adrian's place? Or is he not taking your calls anymore? Her shoulders sagged like someone had let all the air out of her. Please, Marcus. Can I come in? We need to talk. Do we? Because last time I checked, I wasn't invited to conversations about our relationship. Something about not being invited to things that concern me. I leaned against the doorframe, making it clear that entry to my sanctuary wasn't going to be automatic. But sure, come on in. Mi casa es su casa. Or should I say, mi casa es mi casa, since apparently we're not sharing things anymore. She walked past me into the apartment, and I could practically smell the desperation coming off her in waves. This wasn't the confident, radiant woman who'd been holding hands with her boyfriend 48 hours ago. This was someone who'd spent the day discovering that the real world was a lot less forgiving than the carefully curated bubble she'd been living in. I didn't think you'd actually do this, she said, turning to face me with the kind of expression you usually see on people who've just realized they've been playing Russian roulette with a fully loaded gun. I mean, I knew you were upset about the party, but I didn't think you'd actually shut down the entire company. Upset, I repeated slowly, like I was tasting a foreign word. Upset is when someone cuts you off in traffic, Clara. Upset is when your favorite restaurant runs out of the good wine. What I am is disappointed. Disappointed that my wife of 8 years decided to publicly humiliate me at a party I paid for while announcing our marriage was over via interpretive handholding with her office boyfriend. She flinched like I'd slapped her. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Adrian and I, We've been trying to figure out how to handle this situation and handle this situation? I laughed, but it wasn't a particularly friendly sound. You mean handle the situation where you've been screwing your coworker while I've been bankrolling your lifestyle? That situation. I was going to tell you, she said, her voice getting smaller. I didn't know how to stop it. Adrian was so confident, so sure of himself, and I felt like I was losing myself in our marriage. Like I was just Mrs. Marcus Henderson instead of Clara Henderson, and I. Oh, spare me the self-discovery narrative, I interrupted. You weren't finding yourself, sweetheart. You were shopping for an upgrade while keeping the original warranty active. The only problem is you forgot to read the fine print on that warranty. She moved to the living room and sank onto my couch like she owned the place, which was rich considering she'd spent the last 2 days acting like I was a stranger. I admit I handled things badly. The party was a mistake. I should have talked to you privately first. A mistake, I said, following her into the room but remaining standing. Like accidentally ordering the wrong wine at dinner. Clara, you planned an entire evening around erasing me from your life while using my credit card to pay for it. That's not a mistake. That's performance art. She looked up at me with those big brown eyes that had once made me forget my own name, but now just reminded me of how stupid I'd been for the past few months. I was afraid, she whispered. Afraid that if I defended you in front of my friends, they'd think I was weak, that I couldn't stand on my own 2 feet. So instead you decided to prove you could stand on your own 2 feet by cutting off the legs that were holding you up, I said. Brilliant strategy. Really shows that MBA from Wharton was money well spent. Marcus, please. She stood up and took a step toward me, and for a moment I could see the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Before the society parties and the magazine interviews and the slow transformation into someone I barely recognized. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. And I know I made everything worse by handling it the way I did. But we can fix this. We can work it out. Fix this. I looked at her like she'd just suggested we could fix the Titanic with duct tape and good intentions. Clara, sweetheart, you can't unring a bell. You can't unexpose someone's dirty laundry in front of half of Manhattan. And you definitely can't unfuck your coworker. She winced again, but pressed on. I'll end things with Adrian. I'll make a public statement apologizing for everything. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Whatever it takes, I repeated. That's interesting, because I actually have a very specific list of what it's going to take. Rena delivered it to you earlier today. Tell me, what did you think of my terms? Her face went through about 17 different expressions before settling on something that looked like she'd just bitten into a lemon filled with broken glass. Those terms they're completely unreasonable. You're asking me to give up everything I've worked for. Everything you've worked for, I said, walking to the window and looking out at the city lights. You mean everything I've worked for while you've been playing CEO for the cameras? There's a difference, Clara. A pretty significant difference. The company was our joint effort. The company was my vision, my code, my algorithms, and my money, I interrupted. You were the spokesperson. A very attractive, very articulate spokesperson, but let's not confuse marketing with engineering. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could practically hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to figure out some angle, some way to spin this situation back in her favor. Finally, she said, what about a compromise? We could restructure the terms, make them more equitable. I turned back to face her, and I must have been smiling because she took an involuntary step backward. Equitable. You want to talk about equitable after you spent the last 6 months fucking another man on my dime? After you publicly humiliated me in front of everyone we know? After you tried to erase me from our company's origin story? I never tried to. Clara, I've seen the press interviews. I've read the magazine articles where you talk about your vision for the company and how you built something from nothing. Funny how my name rarely comes up in those stories. She had the decency to look ashamed, but it was too little, too late. I was trying to establish my own credibility in the industry. You have to understand, being married to the guy who actually built the technology made people assume I was just along for the ride. So instead of proving them wrong, you decided to pretend I didn't exist, I said. Real power move there, sweetheart. I'll sign your agreement, she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Whatever you want. I'll resign from the CEO position. I'll pay back the money. I'll make the public statement. Just, please don't destroy everything we built together. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd shared my bed and my dreams for 8 years, who'd gone from being my partner to being my biggest liability. It's not about signing the agreement, Clara. It's about acknowledging what you actually did. It's about admitting that you didn't just cheat on me. You tried to steal my life's work and then throw me away like yesterday's newspaper. I admit it, she said, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. I admit that I was selfish and stupid and cruel. I admit that I took you for granted and treated you like you were disposable when you're the reason any of this exists in the first place. For the first time in 48 hours, she was telling the truth. And you know what? It felt pretty damn good to hear it. Good, I said. That's a start. But admitting it to me isn't enough. You need to admit it to everyone else too. Every investor, every employee, every society reporter who ever wrote a puff piece about Manhattan's power couple. You need to tell the truth about who actually built this empire and who was just posing for pictures in front of it. She nodded frantically, like a bobblehead doll in an earthquake. Yes, anything. I'll do anything to make this right. I handed her a tissue and watched her try to repair the damage to her makeup. We'll see about that, Clara. We'll see about that. The woman who'd walked into my apartment an hour ago had been desperate. The woman who was leaving was something else entirely. Defeated, humbled, and finally ready to face the consequences of thinking she could play in the big leagues without knowing the rules. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting indeed. There's something deeply satisfying about walking into a room full of people who've been scrambling like headless chickens for the past 48 hours, especially when you're the guy who's been calmly orchestrating their panic from the comfort of your leather armchair. The Clarigen Technologies boardroom at 9 a.m. sharp on Friday morning was like a scene from a corporate thriller, except instead of being the guy getting fired, I was the one holding the pink slips. I'd chosen my outfit carefully for this little performance, my best Tom Ford suit, the navy. One that cost more than most people's monthly rent, paired with Italian leather shoes that clicked authoritatively against the marble floors as I made my entrance. When you're about to restructure someone's entire universe, you might as well look good doing it. The glass-walled conference room overlooked Manhattan from the 43rd floor, and on any other day, the view would have been breathtaking. Today, though, all eyes were focused on the long mahogany table where our company's future was about to be decided. The irony wasn't lost on me that this was the same room where Clara had been holding court for months, playing queen of the tech world, while I'd been content to stay in the background pulling the actual strings. Clara was already seated at the far end of the table, looking like she'd aged about 5 years since her midnight visit to my apartment. Her usually immaculate appearance had been replaced by something that screamed damage control. Conservative business attire, minimal makeup, and the kind of haunted expression you see on politicians who've just been caught with their hands in the cookie jar. She wouldn't meet my eyes, which was probably smart, considering what was about to happen to her career. The rest of the board was a collection of nervous energy and barely contained panic. Richard Steinberg, our CFO, looked like he'd been mainlining espresso and antacids for the past 2 days. Jennifer Walsh from Investor Relations kept checking her phone like she was expecting news that the apocalypse had been officially scheduled. Even Marcus Chun, our usually unflappable legal counsel, had the expression of a man who'd just realized he was about to witness either a miracle or a massacre. But the most notable absence was Adrian Blackstone, who was conspicuously not sitting in his usual spot 3 seats down from Clara. Apparently, someone had finally clued him in that showing up to a board meeting when you're about to be terminated might not be the smartest career move. I made a mental note to ask security for the footage of his desk cleaning ceremony. I had a feeling it would make excellent entertainment for future boring evenings. I took my seat at the head of the table, the spot that had technically been mine all along but that I'd rarely bothered to occupy. Funny how quickly things change when you stop being polite and start being real about who actually owns what. "Good morning, everyone," I said, setting my leather portfolio on the table with just enough force to make everyone jump slightly. "I assume you're all wondering why I called this meeting." Richard cleared his throat nervously. "Marcus, we really need to discuss the funding freeze. The payroll department is having a meltdown, and we've got 3 major vendors threatening to suspend services if—" "Richard," I interrupted, holding up one hand. "Before we discuss operational concerns, I think we need to address some fundamental issues about company leadership and accountability." I opened my portfolio and pulled out the agreement I'd spent Wednesday afternoon crafting, along with a second document that I'd prepared specifically for this moment. As you're all aware, there have been some irregularities in how this company has been managed recently. Issues of transparency, fiscal responsibility, and professional conduct that need immediate attention. Clara shifted in her seat like she was sitting on hot coals, but she still didn't look up. Smart woman. Eye contact at this point would have been like staring directly into the sun. Effective immediately, I continued. There will be some changes to our executive structure. First, Clara Henderson will be resigning from her position as Chief Executive Officer, effective today. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the next building. Jennifer Walsh's mouth actually fell open, and Richard looked like he'd just been told that gravity was optional. Even Marcus Chun, who'd probably seen every kind of corporate drama imaginable, seemed stunned by the matter-of-fact way I'd just detonated Clara's career. Additionally, I went on, savoring every word like fine wine. Adrian Blackstone's employment with Clarigen Technologies has been terminated, effective immediately, with no severance package. His access to company systems, facilities, and resources has been revoked, and security has been notified to escort him from the premises should he attempt to return. That got some actual gasps from around the table. Apparently, everyone had suspected something was going on between Clara and Adrian, but nobody had expected it to result in such swift and decisive consequences. Welcome to the real world, kids, where actions have consequences and consequences have price tags. Clara finally looked up, and the expression on her face was equal parts resignation and relief. She'd probably been dreading this moment since I'd handed her that agreement. But now that it was actually happening, she seemed almost grateful to have it over with. I want to make something very clear to everyone in this room, I said, standing up and walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. This company was built on my vision, my technology, and my financial backing. For the past several months, there seems to have been some confusion about these basic facts. I turned back to face the table, making eye contact with each board member in turn. Let me clear up that confusion right now. I am the majority shareholder, I am the primary patent holder, and I am the person who has been funding this operation from day one. Anyone who has a problem with that reality is welcome to submit their resignation along with Clara's. Richard raised his hand tentatively, like a student asking permission to use the bathroom. What about the investor meetings? The client presentations? Clara's been the face of the company Clara has been a very effective spokesperson, I acknowledged. But there's a significant difference between being the face of something and actually building it. Moving forward, this company will be run by the people who actually understand the technology, the people who actually created the algorithms, and the people who actually own the intellectual property. I walked back to my seat and pulled out a second document. Which brings me to the new organizational structure. I will be assuming the role of Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. Additionally, I will be taking 2 permanent board seats, including the newly created position of Financial Oversight Director. Jennifer Walsh found her voice first. What exactly does Financial Oversight Director entail? I'm glad you asked, I said, smiling for the first time since entering the room. The Financial Oversight Director will have veto power over any company expenditure exceeding $10,000. Every major financial decision, every significant contract, every executive compensation package will require my personal approval. The implications of this hit the room like a freight train. I wasn't just taking control of the company. I was essentially making it impossible for anyone to spend a dime without my permission. Clara had learned the hard way what happened when people took my money for granted. Now everyone else was going to learn the same lesson. Furthermore, I continued, Clara will be personally repaying the company $157 million in structured installments over the next 3 years. The repayment schedule and terms are outlined in the agreement she'll be signing today. Marcus Chin finally spoke up. Marcus, I have to ask, is this legal? Can you actually enforce these kinds of terms? I smiled again, and this time it was definitely predatory. Marcus, I own 90% of this company. I can enforce any terms I want, as long as they're within the bounds of corporate law. And I can assure you, everything in these documents has been carefully reviewed by some very expensive attorneys. Clara stood up slowly, like she was moving underwater. I'll sign whatever you need me to sign, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to apologize to everyone here. Marcus built this company, and I lost sight of that. I let personal issues cloud my professional judgment, and I take full responsibility for the consequences. It was probably the most honest thing she'd said in months, and you could see the shock on everyone's faces. The Clara they'd known, confident, assertive, sometimes borderline arrogant, had been replaced by someone who actually understood the magnitude of what she'd lost. I slid the agreement across the table to her. Sign on page 7, initial pages 3, 5, and 9. She signed without even reading it, which was probably smart, considering the document contained some additional clauses I hadn't bothered to mention yet. Things like non-compete agreements, media restrictions, and a particularly creative clause about public statements that would keep her from bad-mouthing me for the next 5 years. As Clara's pen finished the final signature, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete and total control over my own life. For months, I'd been watching from the sidelines as my wife built a public persona around my work while planning to replace me with a younger model. Now, finally, the natural order had been restored. Excellent, I said, collecting the signed documents. Jennifer, please prepare a press release announcing the leadership transition. Richard, the funding freeze will be lifted as soon as these organizational changes are officially filed. Marcus, I'll need you to update all the corporate documents to reflect the new structure. I stood up and straightened my tie. Oh, and one more thing. Clara's office will need to be cleared out by end of business today. I'll be moving into the executive suite on Monday morning. As I walked toward the door, I turned back for one final moment. Welcome to the new Clarigen Technologies, everyone. I think you're going to find it's a much more efficiently run operation. The silence behind me was deafening, but I could practically feel the respect in the room. For the first time in months, nobody was looking at me like Clara's husband who happened to know some code. They were looking at me like the guy who built a $300 million empire and wasn't afraid to take it back when someone tried to steal it. The revolution was complete, and it felt absolutely fantastic. You know what's funny about revenge? Everyone thinks it's the end game. The final boss battle where you vanquish your enemies and then ride off into the sunset feeling all satisfied and complete. But here's the thing nobody tells you about revenge. It's actually just the appetizer. The real main course is what you do with your life after you've finished destroying the people who tried to destroy you. 2 weeks after the boardroom revolution that had basically nuked Clara's entire professional existence, I was sitting in my Tesla outside a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, staring at a hand-painted sign that read Bright Layer AI, innovating tomorrow, today. The slogan was cheesy as hell, but there was something refreshingly honest about a startup that didn't try to hide behind corporate speak and million-dollar marketing budgets. This wasn't some random visit. I'd been tracking Bright Layer for months, ever since their founder had pitched to Clara and gotten shot down faster than a paper airplane in a hurricane. See, about 6 months ago, this young developer named Lila Chun had waltzed into our conference room with a revolutionary idea for adaptive AI learning systems. The kind of technology that could genuinely change how machines process information, not just make existing systems marginally more efficient. Clara had dismissed the whole thing in about 15 minutes. Too niche, she'd said, waving her hand like she was swatting away an annoying fly. The market isn't ready for that level of complexity. We need to focus on commercial applications that can scale immediately. Translation: she didn't understand the technology well enough to see its potential, so she decided it was garbage. I, on the other hand, had been quietly following Lila's progress ever since. While Clara was busy playing CEO and planning her exit strategy with Adrian, I'd been watching this kid basically revolutionize artificial intelligence from a warehouse in Brooklyn with nothing but determination, brilliant code, and what appeared to be an unlimited supply of energy drinks. The building itself looked like every other startup workspace in Brooklyn. Exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, and the kind of deliberately casual aesthetic that screamed, "We're too cool for traditional office space." But as I walked through the front door, I could immediately tell this wasn't just another tech bro operation trying to disrupt the breakfast industry or create an app for raiding your neighbor's lawn. The main workspace was buzzing with the kind of focused energy you only see when people are working on something they actually believe in. About a dozen developers were scattered around high-end workstations, and the walls were covered with whiteboards full of algorithms that made my engineers' hearts sing. These weren't people playing startup. These were people building the future. Lila spotted me before I'd made it 3 steps into the workspace. She was exactly what you'd expect from a 26-year-old MIT grad who decided to revolutionize AI instead of taking a safe job at Google. Jeans, sneakers, and a hoodie that probably cost less than Clara spent on lunch, but with the kind of sharp, intelligent eyes that told you she could probably code circles around half of Silicon Valley. Marcus Henderson, she said, walking over with a grin that was equal parts excited and nervous. I have to admit, when your assistant called and said you wanted to visit, I thought it was some kind of prank. Aren't you supposed to be running Clarigen Technologies? Things change, I said, looking around at the workspace with genuine appreciation. Sometimes they change pretty dramatically. Mind giving me the grand tour? For the next hour, Lila walked me through Bright Layer's technology stack, and I have to say, it was like being a kid in the world's smartest candy store. What she'd built wasn't just innovative, it was the kind of breakthrough that comes along maybe once in a decade. Her adaptive learning algorithms could process and integrate new information in ways that made existing AI systems look like pocket calculators. The best part? She'd done it all with a shoestring budget and a team of developers who were working for equity and the promise of changing the world. No corporate bureaucracy, no marketing department dictating technical decisions, no executives who thought machine learning was something that happened at the gym. The problem we keep running into, Lila explained as we stood in front of a wall-sized monitor displaying real-time performance metrics, is funding. We've got the technology, we've got the team, but trying to scale without serious capital is like trying to build a rocket ship with a bicycle budget. How much are we talking about? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. For proper scaling? To build out the infrastructure, hire the additional talent we need, and really push this technology to market. She paused, probably trying to figure out if she was about to scare away her first real investor. We're looking at about $12 million for the next 18 months. $12 million. Clara had probably spent more than that on her wardrobe over the past 3 years. I'd watched her drop 20 grand on a single dinner party without blinking. But here was someone asking for enough money to potentially revolutionize artificial intelligence, and she was nervous about whether it was too much. Tell me something, Lila, I said, leaning against one of the workstations. When you pitched to Clarigen 6 months ago, what did you think of the rejection? Her face went through about 6 different expressions before settling on diplomatic frustration. Honestly, I thought it was short-sighted. The technology speaks for itself, but I got the impression that the decision-makers were more interested in safe, incremental improvements than genuine innovation. The decision-makers, I repeated. You mean Clara? I mean whoever was making the call, she said carefully. Though I have to say, after doing my research on Clarigen's technical foundation, I was surprised the company wasn't more interested in next-generation AI development. Smart kid. She'd basically just told me that she knew I was the real brains behind Clarigen without directly insulting my soon-to-be ex-wife. Diplomatic and technically brilliant. Exactly the kind of person you want running a company that's actually going to change the world. Here's the thing, Lila, I said, pulling out my phone. I'm about to make you an offer, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. I'm prepared to provide $12 million in seed funding, plus an additional $8 million for expansion capital. In exchange, I want a 40% equity stake and a seat on your board of directors. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. Are you serious? $20 million. Dead serious. But I'm not just offering money. I'm offering partnership. My technical expertise, my industry connections, my experience building and scaling AI companies. This isn't just an investment. It's me betting my reputation on your vision. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the wall of algorithms like they might provide some guidance on how to handle having your entire professional life change in the span of 30 seconds. Finally, she looked back at me with tears in her eyes. Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. God, yes. You have no idea what this means. Actually, I do, I said, thinking about the last 2 weeks of systematically dismantling Clara's empire and rebuilding my own life from scratch. I know exactly what it means to get a second chance to build something real. We spent the next 2 hours going over technical specifications, business plans, and growth projections. By the time I left Brightlayer that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, genuine excitement about the future. Not the hollow satisfaction of destroying my enemies, but the deep, sustainable joy of creating something meaningful. As I drove back into Manhattan, I couldn't help but contrast this visit with the countless corporate meetings I'd sat through at Clarigen, where half the conversation was about optics and market positioning and maintaining our competitive advantage. At Brightlayer, the only thing anyone cared about was building technology that could actually make the world better. Clara had spent months trying to erase me from our company's origin story, painting herself as the visionary founder while I played the role of supportive tech husband. But sitting in that Brooklyn warehouse, watching Lila's team work on algorithms that could revolutionize how machines think, I realized something important. I didn't need to be part of someone else's story anymore. I was ready to write my own. The funny thing about having your life blown up by your cheating wife is that it forces you to figure out who you really are when you strip away all the external validation and social expectations. For 8 years, I'd been Marcus Henderson, husband of tech CEO Clara Henderson. For the past 2 weeks, I'd been Marcus Henderson, the guy who'd spectacularly destroyed his wife's career and taken back his company. But driving through Brooklyn that afternoon, I realized I was ready to be something else entirely. Marcus Henderson, the guy who found the next generation of technological innovators and helped them change the world. It beat the hell out of being known as the guy whose wife screwed him over at his own birthday party. The quiet satisfaction I felt wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about possibility. About building something new instead of just tearing down something old. About finding people who shared my vision of what technology could accomplish when it wasn't filtered through corporate bureaucracy and personal agendas. Clara could keep her society parties and her magazine interviews and her carefully curated public persona. I had something better. The chance to work with people who cared more about changing the world than looking good while they did it. And honestly, that felt like the best revenge of all. You know what's better than revenge? Watching your ex-wife publicly admit that she's been taking credit for your life's work while simultaneously apologizing for treating you like a financial ATM with a wedding ring. And you know what's even better than that? Getting to approve the exact wording of that apology like you're editing a particularly satisfying piece of corporate fiction. It was a crisp Tuesday morning in November when Clara and I met at Cafe Luna, one of those overpriced Manhattan coffee shops where investment bankers go to feel cultured and society wives gather to plan charity galas that are really just excuses to show off their latest Hermes bags. I'd chosen the location specifically because it was public enough that Clara couldn't make a scene, but private enough that we could have a real conversation without half of Manhattan's social elite pretending not to eavesdrop. Clara was already waiting when I arrived, sitting at a corner table and staring at her laptop screen like it contained the nuclear launch codes. She looked different. Gone was the perfectly styled hair and the designer outfit that screamed, "I'm too important to check price tags." Instead, she was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, minimal makeup, and the kind of resigned expression you see on people who finally accepted that their 15 minutes of fame are officially over. "Morning, Clara," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Working on anything interesting?" She looked up, and for a split second, I saw a flash of the woman I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago. Before the magazine covers and the TED Talks and the slow transformation into someone I barely recognized. "The public statement," she said quietly. "I've been working on it for 3 days, and I can't get it right." I ordered a double espresso from the hovering waitress. When you're about to review your ex-wife's public mea culpa, you need serious caffeine, and leaned back in my chair. "Let's see what you've got." She turned the laptop toward me, and I have to admit, I was curious to see how Clara was going to spin 8 years of taking credit for my work into something that resembled an actual apology. The draft on her screen was, well, it was pure Clara. Lots of flowery language about shared visions and collaborative partnerships and mutual respect, but very light on the actual facts. "This reads like a press release from a couple's therapy session," I said after scanning through the first paragraph. "You're apologizing for not communicating better, not for systematically erasing me from our company's history while planning to dump me for your office boyfriend." She winced, but didn't argue. I'm trying to find a way to be honest without completely destroying what's left of my reputation. Your reputation, I repeated slowly. Clara, sweetheart, your reputation was built on taking credit for my algorithms while I was too polite to correct the record. Maybe it's time to build a new reputation based on something slightly more authentic. For the next 2 hours, we sat in that overpriced cafe and crafted what was essentially Clara's professional obituary. Every sentence was negotiated like a hostage situation, with me pushing for actual truth and Clara trying to find ways to minimize the damage to her carefully constructed public persona. The breakthrough came when I finally said, "Look, you can either tell the truth voluntarily, or I can hold a press conference and tell it for you. Your choice, but one way or another, the real story is coming out." That's when she finally stopped trying to salvage her image and started focusing on damage control. We rewrote the entire thing from scratch, and by the time we were finished, it was a masterpiece of public accountability. Not because it was particularly eloquent or well-crafted, but because it was actually honest for the first time in years. The final version read like this. After careful consideration and reflection on recent events, I want to address some misconceptions about the founding and development of Clarigen Technologies. While I have served as CEO and been the public face of the company, I must acknowledge that the foundational vision, technical innovation, and primary financial backing came from my husband, Marcus Henderson. Marcus developed the core algorithms that power our AI systems, secured the initial patents, and provided the strategic technical leadership that made our company possible. My role was primarily in business development and public relations, though I allowed myself to be portrayed as the primary founder in various media appearances. I deeply regret that my recent personal choices have overshadowed the professional integrity that should define our company. I failed to properly credit Marcus for his contributions, and I failed to maintain the personal and professional standards expected of someone in my position. Effective immediately, I am stepping down as CEO of Clarigen Technologies to ensure that the company is led by someone who fully understands both the technical foundations and the responsibility that comes with that role. Marcus will be assuming the CEO position, and I will be working to ensure a smooth transition. I apologize to our employees, investors, and partners for any confusion my actions may have caused, and I take full responsibility for the mistakes in judgment that led to this situation. Clarigen Technologies remains a strong company with revolutionary technology, and I am confident that under Marcus's leadership, it will continue to thrive and innovate. I also want to apologize personally to Marcus for failing to defend him when it mattered most, and for allowing personal issues to compromise our professional relationship. He built the foundation of our company, and I should have made that clear from the beginning. Reading through the final draft, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, satisfaction that didn't come from destroying someone else. This wasn't just Clara admitting she'd screwed up. This was her finally telling the truth about who had actually built the empire she'd been ruling over. This is good, I said, closing the laptop. Honest, direct, takes responsibility without making excuses. When are you planning to release it? Tomorrow morning, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. All the major tech publications, the business journals, and the society pages. The society pages. That was the part that was really going to sting for Clara. Having her professional reputation take a hit was one thing, but having all her Manhattan social circle read about how she'd been taking credit for her husband's work while cheating on him, that was going to hurt in ways that quarterly earnings reports never could. You know this is going to change everything, right? I said. Your speaking engagements, your board positions, your whole public persona. People are going to remember this. She nodded, looking like someone who'd just realized they were about to jump out of an airplane without checking if their parachute was properly packed. I know, but it's time. I've been living a lie for so long that I'd forgotten what the truth even looked like. We sat in silence for a moment, two people who'd once planned to build a life together now negotiating the terms of how to tear it down with maximum honesty and minimum collateral damage. For what it's worth, Clara said finally, I am sorry. Not just about the statement or the company or even Adrian. I'm sorry that I turned into someone who could treat you the way I did. You deserved better. And you know what? She was right. I had deserved better. I deserved a wife who was proud of our partnership instead of trying to erase me from it. I deserved someone who wanted to build something together instead of stealing credit and planning an exit strategy. But sitting in that cafe, watching Clara finally take responsibility for the choices that had blown up our marriage and her career, I realized something important. I didn't need her apology anymore. I didn't need her acknowledgement or her regret or her admission that she'd been wrong. What I needed was exactly what I was getting: the truth, told publicly, by the person who'd been lying about it for years. The statement went live at 8 a.m. the next morning, simultaneously posted to Clara's LinkedIn, Twitter, and Medium accounts, and sent as a press release to every major tech publication. By 9 a.m., my phone was ringing nonstop with reporters wanting to confirm the details, investors asking about the leadership transition, and industry analysts trying to figure out what this meant for Clarigen's future. But the best call came at 10:15 a.m. from Lila at Brightlayer. "Holy shit, Marcus," she said, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. "Did you see the TechCrunch article? They're calling you the silent genius behind one of the decade's most innovative AI companies. This is huge for the industry. Finally, people are going to know who really built that technology." And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about Clara admitting her mistakes or salvaging what was left of our professional relationship. This was about setting the record straight for everyone who'd ever wondered how someone with Clara's background had supposedly revolutionized artificial intelligence overnight. The truth was finally out there, and it felt better than any revenge I could have imagined. The industry chatter was immediate and brutal. Within hours, think pieces were appearing about the hidden technical founders behind high-profile companies, and Clara's name was being used as a cautionary tale about the difference between being a CEO and actually understanding the technology your company produces. It was exactly what she deserved and exactly what I needed. Not vindication for my wounded pride, but recognition for the work I'd been doing all along. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's simply making sure everyone knows the truth about who they really are. You know what nobody tells you about winning? It's not nearly as satisfying as you think it's going to be. Don't get me wrong. Watching Clara's carefully constructed empire crumble while I reclaimed everything that was rightfully mine had been spectacular. But after the dust settled and the lawyers finished dividing up our assets and the tech industry finished gossiping about Manhattan's most expensive divorce, I was left with something I hadn't experienced in years: the complete freedom to figure out who I actually wanted to be. 6 months after Clara's public statement had torpedoed what was left of her reputation, I was standing in the living room of my new apartment on the Upper West Side, looking out at a view that didn't require me to remember which furniture my cheating ex-wife had picked out. The place was smaller than the penthouse. Only 2 bedrooms instead of 4, no marble floors or crystal chandeliers or any of the other expensive crap that had been cluttering up my life for the past 8 years. But it had something the penthouse never had: sunlight. Actual, honest-to-God natural light streaming through windows that faced east toward the park, filling the space with warmth that no amount of designer lighting could replicate. It was the kind of simple pleasure you forget exists when you're busy trying to maintain a lifestyle that looks impressive on Instagram, but feels hollow as hell in real life. The apartment itself was a study in deliberate simplicity. Comfortable furniture that I'd actually chosen based on whether I liked sitting in it, not whether it would photograph well for Architectural Digest. Books on the shelves that I'd actually read, not coffee table volumes about art movements I'd never cared about. A kitchen where I could make coffee without wondering if the marble countertops were worth more than most people's cars. No assistants, no housekeeping staff, no personal trainers or lifestyle consultants, or any of the other people who'd been managing my existence while I was too busy building algorithms to notice that I'd become a stranger in my own life. Just space to think, space to breathe, and space to remember what it felt like to make decisions based on what I actually wanted instead of what would maintain the Henderson family brand. The divorce had been surprisingly clean, legally speaking. When one spouse has been systematically taking credit for the other spouse's intellectual property while planning their exit strategy with a coworker, the distribution of assets tends to be pretty straightforward. Clara got to keep her personal belongings and a modest settlement that would allow her to maintain a comfortable lifestyle as long as she didn't try to recreate her previous spending habits. I got everything else: the company, the patents, the real estate, and most importantly, the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served with compound interest. But the real victory wasn't financial. The real victory was waking up every morning and not having to wonder what fresh humiliation was waiting for me at the office or what expensive mistake Clara had made that I'd have to quietly fix. The real victory was being able to look in the mirror and see someone who'd finally learned the difference between being successful and being authentically happy. I'd been spending most of my time mentoring young entrepreneurs, people like Lila who had brilliant ideas but needed someone with experience to help them navigate the brutally competitive world of tech startups. It was the kind of work that actually felt meaningful, helping people build something real instead of just accumulating wealth for its own sake. The Brightlayer investment had been paying off beyond my wildest expectations. Lila's team had secured 3 major corporate clients, and their adaptive AI technology was getting the kind of industry attention that Clara had always craved but never actually earned. Better yet, working with them reminded me why I'd fallen in love with technology in the first place, not for the money or the status, but for the sheer intellectual joy of solving problems that nobody else could solve. I'd also started teaching a graduate seminar at Columbia, sharing what I'd learned about building tech companies with the next generation of engineers and entrepreneurs. The students called me Professor Henderson, which was hilarious considering I'd never actually finished my PhD, but there was something deeply satisfying about passing on knowledge to people who were hungry to learn instead of just looking for shortcuts to success. The doorbell rang, interrupting my morning coffee and my contemplation of how dramatically my life had changed. I wasn't expecting anyone. One of the benefits of living a simpler life was that you didn't have to maintain a social calendar that looked like a Fortune 500 CEO's itinerary. I opened the door to find a FedEx delivery guy holding an envelope with my name written in handwriting I recognized, but hadn't seen in months. Clara's distinctive cursive, the same elegant script that had once written me love notes and anniversary cards back when we were actually building something together instead of just pretending to be happy for the cameras. "Have a good day, sir," the delivery guy said, apparently oblivious to the fact that he'd just delivered what was probably either an apology letter or a declaration of war from my ex-wife. I took the envelope back to my living room and set it on the coffee table, a simple wooden piece that I'd bought because I liked the grain pattern, not because some interior designer had told me it would photograph well for a lifestyle magazine. For about 10 minutes, I just stared at it, trying to decide if I actually wanted to know what Clara had to say 6 months after her public statement had effectively ended her career in tech. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. I opened the envelope and found a single sheet of paper with a brief handwritten note. "Marcus, I know I have no right to contact you after everything that happened, but I wanted you to know that I've been following the news about Brightlayer and your work at Columbia. I'm genuinely happy that you're building something positive instead of just tearing down what we had together. I left the public spotlight and moved to Portland last month. I'm working for a small nonprofit that helps underserved communities access technology education. It's not glamorous, and the pay is terrible, but it's the first time in years that I've felt like I was actually contributing something meaningful to the world instead of just playing a role. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand the difference between being famous and being worthwhile. You tried to teach me that lesson for years, but I was too busy chasing applause to listen. I hope you're happy. You deserve to be. Clara. P.S. I saw the article about your engagement to that professor from NYU. She seems lovely, and I'm glad you found someone who appreciates who you actually are instead of just what you can provide." I had to read that last part twice before it sank in. Engagement? What engagement? I wasn't engaged to anyone, let alone a professor from NYU. Then I remembered the faculty mixer I'd attended last month, where I'd spent most of the evening talking with Dr. Sarah Chun, a brilliant computer science professor who'd been asking thoughtful questions about my work with adaptive algorithms. Someone had apparently seen us together and jumped to some very creative conclusions. The idea of being engaged to someone I'd met exactly once was absurd, but it also made me realize something important. I was ready for that kind of connection again. Not the performative relationship I'd had with Clara, where everything was filtered through public perception and social media strategy, but something real and authentic with someone who valued substance over style. I folded Clara's letter and put it in my desk drawer, not because I wanted to keep it as some kind of memento, but because it felt like the proper ending to a chapter of my life that had taken way too long to close. She'd finally found her way to something resembling self-awareness, and while it was about 8 years too late to save our marriage, It was oddly comforting to know that she'd eventually figured out the difference between being important and being authentic. The afternoon sun was streaming through my windows, and I had a meeting with a promising startup founder in an hour, followed by dinner with colleagues who actually appreciated my sense of humor instead of just tolerating it. My calendar was full of things I'd chosen to do with people I genuinely liked, not obligations I had to fulfill to maintain some exhausting public persona. I looked around my sunlit apartment, at the books I'd chosen and the furniture I'd picked and the life I'd built for myself after burning down everything that had been suffocating me for years. No assistants, no staged photos, no carefully curated social media presence. Just space to think and work and become whoever I wanted to be without anyone else's approval or applause. For the first time in years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten was possible: complete contentment with my own choices. My worth wasn't tied to Clara's approval anymore, or to her world, or to anyone else's definition of success. I had something much better than revenge or vindication or public recognition. I had control over my own life, my own work, and my own dignity. And honestly, that was worth more than all the penthouse apartments and society parties and magazine covers in Manhattan. The war was over, and I'd won something better than victory. I'd won the freedom to finally be myself. 5 years. It's strange how long that can feel when every minute of it is spent chasing a future that was never really yours to claim. My name is Marcus Hale, and for what feels like a lifetime, my world rotated around a single mission: to help my wife, Sienna, achieve her dreams. It wasn't just something I said at the altar, it was a promise that wove itself into every muscle ache, every sleepless night, every silent prayer said behind the wheel of that beat-up delivery van. I would start my mornings before the sun cracked the sky, stacking pallets in freezing warehouses where the forklifts beeped endlessly, then clock out just long enough to grab a stale sandwich and start my evening shift delivering packages. Amazon, groceries, pizza, you name it. I dropped it off with a tired smile that barely masked how close I was to crumbling. Every time I stumbled through the door at 3 a.m., Sienna would be there in our tiny apartment, curled up on the couch with her nursing textbook scattered like a fan around her. She would blink up at me, exhaustion matching mine, and whisper, just a little longer, "Baby." I lived for those words, kissed her forehead, tucked a blanket around her, and told myself that love was measured in sacrifices, not in comfort. I watched her grind too, studying through migraines, pulling all-nighters before exams, fighting the gnawing fear that she wasn't good enough. And God help me, I admired her for it. I didn't see the warning signs, not really. I chalked up the distance between us to stress. The way her laughter no longer filled the room like it used to, the way her eyes sometimes darted away when I said, "I love you," how she stopped asking me about my day. I thought we were just tired, overworked, climbing that steep hill together. Every time she cried about failing a mock test or doubted her abilities, I held her tighter, working harder to build the foundation she could stand on. I remember one night clearer than most, the night she got her acceptance letter into the nursing program. She screamed, leaping into my arms, her joy so blinding I forgot how heavy my own chest felt. "We did it," she cried. And in that moment, I believed it was true. We, not her. Us. A team. What a fool I was. Over the years, every dollar I earned funneled into her education. Books that cost as much as our monthly utilities. Lab coats. Clinical supplies. Gas money for hospital rotations. Meanwhile, I wore shoes with holes in the soles, and my idea of a luxury meal was adding bacon to a drive-through cheeseburger. It didn't matter. I convinced myself it would all be worth it in the end. That one day, we'd look back at the struggle and laugh, wrapped up in a better life we had bled together to build. That was the dream, wasn't it? Build her up so we could rise together. What I didn't realize, what I was too stupid, too trusting, too in love to realize, was that in her mind, the finish line wasn't the beginning of our next chapter. It was the end of my usefulness. I was the training wheels she couldn't wait to kick off once she learned how to balance without me. All the whispered promises, all the midnight forehead kisses, they weren't a covenant. They were a transaction with a hidden expiration date. And when it finally came due, I wouldn't even be afforded the dignity of a warning. There's a cruelty in hope. It blinds you to the moments when the people you love most start packing up pieces of themselves without telling you. You stand there smiling like a fool, holding out your heart like an offering, never noticing that their hands are already too full with new dreams you no longer fit inside. 5 years of believing, of breaking my back to build a dream that was only meant for one of us. 5 years of just a little longer, baby, echoing in my ears, a lullaby masking a slow goodbye. I carried that hope like a fool carries a winning lottery ticket he never bothered to check, thinking it would save me, change everything, when really, it was just paper. Worthless, once the numbers were revealed. I wish I could say I saw it coming, that I noticed the way her hugs turned hollow, or the way she flinched when I mentioned the future. But love makes you blind in the most insidious way, not by covering your eyes, but by filling them with so much brightness you can't see the cracks forming in the foundation. I didn't see it. I didn't feel it until it hit me full force, like a sledgehammer to the chest. And by the time I realized the truth, there was no going back. Sienna Hale, the woman I built my life around, had already decided that the life we built together was a stepping stone she was ready to leave behind. And me? I was just the fool still standing at the bottom of the staircase, arms outstretched, waiting for a hand that was never going to reach back down. I didn't know what I was walking into that day. If I had, maybe I would have braced myself harder. Maybe I would have recognized the brittle tension in the air the moment I stepped through the door. But no. After all these years, some part of me still believed in happy endings. I had stopped at the store on my way home from the night shift, the exhaustion heavy in my bones, but the excitement somehow stronger. I'd grabbed a cheap bouquet of roses and a card that said "Proud of you" in big, stupid gold letters. I was ready to celebrate her. Us. Everything we had fought so hard for. But when I pushed the door open, the apartment was too still, too staged, almost like a set on a show where I was the only one who hadn't read the script. The champagne bottle caught my eye first, glinting in the sunlight like a trap. It sat in the center of the kitchen table, next to a neat stack of papers. And there she was, Sienna, radiant in her crisp white coat, the symbol of all those years of sacrifice made real. She looked like everything we had ever dreamed of. For half a second I smiled. Half a second before the pit opened under my feet. She turned, her expression shining with something that wasn't joy. It was freedom. A wild, untamed relief that had nothing to do with me. "You made it," she said lightly, picking up the champagne and popping the cork with an ease that made my stomach twist. Foam spilled over the edge, and she giggled, pouring 2 glasses without even looking at me. I set the flowers down stupidly on the counter. They looked pathetic there, bright and desperate and out of place in a room that no longer belonged to me. I reached for the papers, my fingers trembling slightly, my heart hammering a warning I didn't yet have the courage to heed. I didn't need to read the title. I knew instantly. Divorce agreement. Property division. No kids, no assets except the battered truck and the worn furniture we bought secondhand when we were broke and stupid and wildly in love. I lifted my gaze to hers, searching, pleading silently for some explanation, some hint of the woman I had given everything to. Instead, she smiled wider, clinking her glass against mine. "I need to grow without dead weight holding me back," she said, her tone breezy, as if discussing a new hairstyle. Dead weight. That was what I had become to her. A tether she no longer wanted dragging behind her now that she had the wings she needed. I didn't argue. Not because I agreed, but because I realized, standing there like an idiot in my work boots and warehouse uniform, that anything I said would only dignify the way she had already rewritten our history. Love hadn't died here. It had been methodically buried, replaced by ambition, by resentment, by a hunger for a life that no longer included me. I sat down heavily at the table, the chair groaning under the weight of the moment, and reached for the pin she had already thoughtfully placed beside the papers. My hand hovered for a second where I thought about fighting, about begging her to remember the nights we slept on an air mattress because we couldn't afford a bed frame, about the nights I came home with frostbitten fingers just to put gas in her car so she could make it to her clinicals, about all the invisible ways I had built a world around her. But what good would it do? She had already decided I didn't belong in the life she had fought for. So I signed. No hesitation, no dramatic pause for effect. Just the quick, brutal scratch of pen on paper. Behind me, I heard laughter, a soft, mocking giggle that made my skin crawl. I turned slightly to see Rachel, Sienna's best friend, leaning against the kitchen doorway with a glass of champagne in hand, her smirk barely disguised. She didn't even try to hide her satisfaction. I realized then that this wasn't a private betrayal, it was a celebration, a liberation. The two of them, giddy with the idea of a future without me cluttering up the picture. I pushed the signed papers toward Sienna and stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, a sharp, ugly sound that felt too fitting for the moment. She didn't say thank you, didn't say sorry, just picked up the papers, glanced at my signature, and nodded approvingly, as if I had just completed one final chore before being dismissed. I walked to the door on legs that felt strangely detached from my body, numb and slow. I didn't look back. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing whatever emotion might have leaked through the cracks. Not anger, not sadness. Nothing. Let them laugh. Let them toast. Outside, the world was achingly normal. Birds chirped. A neighbor washed his car. Somewhere, a lawnmower buzzed. The sun was too bright, too oblivious to the shattering that had just occurred behind that door. I climbed into my old pickup, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring straight ahead, trying to remember how to breathe without her. 5 years ago, I had vowed to build a life around her. I had spent every waking moment stacking stone after stone, brick after brick, constructing a dream that she could stand tall within. And today, with a few strokes of a pen and a bottle of champagne, she had bulldozed it all to the ground. Not with rage or cruelty, but with something colder, indifference. I shifted the truck into gear and pulled away from the curb, the tires crunching over loose gravel. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just drove, 1 mile at a time, away from the life I had built, away from the woman who no longer needed me. Somewhere deep down, a tiny, broken voice whispered that maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning. But in that moment, it didn't feel like it. In that moment, it felt like all I had left were ashes. The night air clung to my skin like a second, colder layer as I packed my life into the back of my battered blue pickup. There wasn't much to load. Some clothes, a few tools, an old coffee maker with a cracked handle, and a box of memories I couldn't yet bring myself to throw away. The same memories that felt like a weight chained to my chest. I moved quietly, methodically, as if making too much noise might give someone the chance to talk me out of leaving. But no one came out. No one stopped me. The apartment that had once been our sanctuary now loomed behind me, windows glowing warmly like a cruel joke. I didn't expect Sienna to come outside. I guess some stubborn, wounded part of me hoped she might. That maybe she'd stand on the porch, arms crossed in that way she used to when we fought, daring me to stay, daring me to care enough to fight back. But the doorway stayed empty. The only figure that appeared was her mother, Carla. She leaned against the porch post, a full glass of wine swirling lazily in her hand. She wore a smirk like armor, watching me like a cat watches a trapped mouse. I didn't give her the satisfaction of meeting her gaze. Didn't flinch when she raised the glass in a mocking toast as I loaded the last of my things. Her contempt didn't hurt nearly as much as Sienna's indifference. The engine of my truck coughed to life, a rough, defiant sound in the stillness of the night. I slammed the door shut, the echo bouncing off the nearby houses, and for the first time in years, there was no one waiting behind a window to see if I made it home safe. I was alone, completely, undeniably alone. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached and dared one last glance into the rearview mirror. That's when I saw her, Sienna, standing inside the living room, visible through the thin curtain. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even looking in my direction. She was laughing, tossing her graduation cap in the air like she had just won a game I never realized we were playing. The sight punched the air out of my lungs harder than any physical blow ever could. I swallowed the sharp ache in my throat, shifted the truck into reverse, and backed out of the driveway without looking back again. I didn't peel out. I didn't slam the brakes for dramatic effect. I simply left. I drove slow, deliberate, every mile putting more distance between the man who had begged for scraps of love and the man I was about to become. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, lighting up with Jasper's name. My brother, always loyal, always ready to charge into battle for me, even when I didn't ask. I let it ring, let it go to voicemail. He had called 3 times already today, his voice getting more desperate each time. Marcus, don't do this, man. She's just scared. She doesn't mean it. You guys can fix this. But there was no fixing something that had been broken quietly over years, with every dismissive glance, every forgotten promise, every whispered, just a little longer, that had slowly rotted away what we once were. No, I was done fighting for someone who had so clearly stopped fighting for me. Done bleeding for a love that had turned into a transaction she could terminate when it no longer served her. I silenced the phone, shoving it deep into the glove compartment where its pleading buzz would be nothing more than a faint, distant memory. The farther I drove, the lighter I felt, an unfamiliar, almost terrifying sensation. Like I had been carrying a boulder on my back for so long that standing upright again felt wrong, unnatural. I didn't have a plan. No job lined up. No new place to stay. I had a few $1,000s in the bank, a battered pickup, and the clothes on my back. That's it. But for the first time in a long time, I also had something Sienna could never again take from me: my freedom. Somewhere beyond the horizon, there had to be a life not built on sacrifice alone, a life that didn't require me to shrink smaller and smaller just to fit into someone else's dream. I drove until the familiar landmarks disappeared, until the city lights faded into a blanket of stars I hadn't seen in years, until the ache in my chest dulled into something manageable. I didn't know exactly where I was heading. I just knew it had to be somewhere Sienna's memory couldn't reach. Somewhere I could be just Marcus, not Marcus the delivery guy, Marcus the night manager, Marcus the husband who wasn't enough. Just Marcus. Around dawn, I pulled over on the side of a quiet country road. The fields stretched out endlessly on either side, the mist curling around the low hills like lazy ghosts. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, breathing in the silence, letting it settle into the empty spaces Sienna had left behind. I opened the glove compartment and pulled out my phone again. One last check. No new messages. No frantic apology. No sudden realization of regret. And somehow, that made it easier. I deleted her number, the final cut of a thread I had clung to long after it had frayed beyond repair. Then I dropped the phone back in the glove box, closed it with a soft click, and leaned back against the worn seat. I didn't cry. The tears had dried up somewhere between the sound of Rachel's laughter and the sight of Sienna's cap flying through the air. What was left wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger. It was something colder, something sharper. Resolve. I was done being the man who stayed. Done being the man who waited. From this moment forward, every mile, every hour, every breath would be mine. And as the sun rose slowly over the empty fields, painting the sky with the soft golds and pinks of a new day, I realized something else. I wasn't lost. I was finally free. Ashwood Creek wasn't on any of the maps that mattered. If you blinked driving through it, you'd miss the cracked welcome sign and the two narrow streets that made up its town center. And that was exactly why I chose it. I needed a place forgotten by ambition, a place that didn't demand explanations or apologies. The day I rolled into Ashwood, my pickup sputtering like it shared my exhaustion, I knew I'd found what I was looking for. It wasn't much to look at: rows of aging brick buildings, a gas station with one working pump, and a diner with a peeling sign that simply said, Gus's. I parked in front of the diner mostly because I didn't know where else to go. My stomach gnawed at me, empty after a long, restless night of driving. When I stepped inside, the place smelled like strong coffee, bacon grease, and something sweeter underneath it all, maybe hope. A few old-timers hunched over their breakfasts, boots tapping rhythmically against the scuffed linoleum floor. The woman behind the counter gave me a once-over and a small nod, like she'd seen my kind before, the kind running from something they didn't want to talk about. I slid into a booth near the window. The vinyl seat stuck to my jeans, the early morning sun slicing across the table. Before I could pick up a menu, a gruff voice interrupted. Coffee. I looked up to find Gus himself, a thick-set man with a shock of gray hair, arms like tree trunks, and a no-nonsense stare that pinned me to the spot. I nodded mutely. He poured without waiting for a response, the dark liquid steaming between us. You new around here? He asked, setting the pot down with a thunk. Passing through, I lied, even though some part of me knew I had no intention of moving on. Gus grunted, unimpressed. He slid a plate of bacon and eggs in front of me without asking what I wanted, then walked away. I stared at the food, my throat tightening unexpectedly. It had been a long time since someone gave me something without asking for anything in return. Days blurred into weeks after that first meal. I found work almost immediately. A guy named Vernon ran a construction crew that always needed strong backs willing to sweat under the sun. It was hard, brutal work, hauling cinder blocks, mixing concrete by hand, hammering in nails until my arms felt like jelly, but it was honest. I didn't mind the blisters or the way my muscles screamed at night. Pain felt good, tangible, unlike the ache Sienna left behind, which was all sharp edges and no place to touch. At night, when the work boots came off and the ache set in, I found myself drifting back to Gus's diner. It wasn't fancy, just a few chipped mugs, a jukebox that only played half the songs right, and a counter that leaned slightly to one side, but it became a kind of refuge. Gus wasn't the talkative type, but he had a way of saying exactly what needed to be said in as few words as possible. Like the night he tossed me a set of keys without warning. "Studio apartment upstairs," he said, jerking his thumb toward a narrow staircase by the kitchen. "It's empty. Cheap rent if you don't mind fixing a few things yourself." I didn't even hesitate. I needed a place. I needed a beginning. The studio was barely bigger than a storage closet, one room with a mattress on the floor, a battered dresser, and a tiny bathroom with a leaking faucet. But it was mine. No ghosts in the walls. No memories bleeding from the floorboards. Just 4 blank walls and the raw material of a new life waiting to be shaped. Gus and I struck an unspoken agreement. I helped out around the diner when I wasn't on a construction site, fixing leaky pipes, repairing broken stools, cleaning out the grease traps nobody else wanted to touch. In return, Gus paid me under the table and kept the coffee flowing. More than once, he caught me working late into the night, grease smeared across my arms, the soft sounds of country music humming from the jukebox. "You ain't broken, son," he said one evening, handing me a beer and leaning against the counter. "You're just unappreciated. There's a difference." I stared at him, not sure if I should laugh or cry. I settled for nodding. Maybe he was right. Maybe being left behind wasn't the same as being worthless. Maybe it was just the wrong people who didn't know how to value what they had. Slowly, painfully, I started stitching myself back together. Not with grand declarations or flashy new beginnings. With small, steady steps. Fixing the squeaky diner door. Rebuilding an old motorcycle I bought off a guy for $200. Watching the sun rise over Ashwood Creek's endless fields. Breathing in air that didn't feel heavy with failure. I didn't tell anyone from my old life where I was. Not Jasper. Not my parents. Definitely not Sienna. It wasn't about punishing them or proving a point. It was about preserving the fragile, growing thing inside me. The part that believed I could be more than the man left holding the empty promises of a life that was never meant to last. One night, after the diner had closed and the stars had spilled across the sky in a thick blanket, I sat on the roof above my studio, legs dangling over the edge. The cool breeze kissed my skin, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I was running. I felt like I was standing still. Whole. Healing. Ashwood Creek didn't care who I used to be. It didn't demand explanations or penance. It just existed, quiet, steady, real. And maybe that was all I needed right now. A place to exist without pretending. A place where I could finally remember who Marcus Hale was before love and loss twisted him into something he barely recognized. The road behind me was closed. The road ahead was uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, the road was mine. It didn't happen overnight. The feeling of belonging. It was like watching a sunrise creep across the horizon, slow, almost invisible at first, but undeniable once it warmed your skin. Ashwood Creek, with its peeling paint and weathered storefronts, became the background of a life I was quietly, stubbornly building. I wasn't Marcus Hale, the man who got left behind anymore. I wasn't anybody, really, and for the first time, that felt like freedom. I bought a house just outside town, a sagging old place with a crumbling porch, vines crawling up the sides like it was being slowly swallowed by nature. The roof leaked when it rained. The front steps were rotted through. Most people would have laughed and driven by. But when I stood there with the keys in my hand, I saw potential. It was mine. It didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be mine. I spent every spare hour fixing it, replacing floorboards, sealing leaks, hauling scrapwood from job sites. Every nail I hammered into place felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The locals started to notice me, not in the intrusive, city kind of way, but in the way of small towns where a nod at the grocery store meant acceptance. Gus introduced me to a few guys at the VFW hall, and before long, I was helping out with their weekend projects, repairing fences, building wheelchair ramps, hauling firewood before the first snows hit. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the life I had once dreamed about when Sienna and I plotted our future over late-night takeout. But it was real, solid under my boots, honest in a way that left no room for the kind of betrayal I'd left behind. And then there was Delilah. I met her on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of humid day where the air sticks to your skin and the clouds hang low like they're too tired to rain. I was fixing the porch rail at the diner when a silver SUV pulled into the gravel lot, thus kicking up behind it. She stepped out with a camera slung around her neck, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, wearing scuffed boots and a denim jacket that looked like it had seen 100 road trips. She glanced around with a kind of wide-eyed curiosity, like she was cataloging the details of the world around her. Our eyes met, And she smiled, a simple, open thing that hit me harder than I expected. I nodded, wiping the sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. She walked over without hesitation. "You're not from around here," she said, her voice light, teasing, not accusing, just an observation. I shrugged. "Guess that makes two of us." She laughed, the sound low and genuine. It wasn't a flirtatious laugh, not the polished kind Sienna used to deploy like a weapon. It was easy, honest. She introduced herself, Delilah Moore, a traveling photographer documenting small towns across America. I didn't have much to say about myself, and she didn't pry. She just sat on the porch steps while I worked, snapping photos of the diner sign, the chipped coffee mugs through the window, the way the afternoon sun turned the dust into gold. Over the next few weeks, she kept showing up. Sometimes she ordered a slice of pie and nursed a cup of coffee for hours, flipping through her photos. Sometimes she sat at the counter and swapped stories with Gus, making the old man laugh in a way I hadn't seen before. And sometimes she found me, wherever I was patching a fence or tuning an engine, and asked if she could take my picture. At first, I said no. I didn't want to be captured, frozen in time as the broken man who ran away. But Delilah had a way of looking at you that made you feel seen, not judged, not pitted, just seen. One day, I relented. She snapped a few shots of me sanding down a motorcycle frame behind the diner. I expected to hate them, expected to see the ghost of who I used to be. But when she showed them to me, I didn't see a broken man. I saw someone still standing, still fighting. Delilah didn't ask about my past. She didn't push. She just let me exist beside her, quietly, steadily, until it felt natural to open up. Sitting on the tailgate of my truck one night, under a sky so full of stars it looked like it could swallow us whole, I found myself telling her things I hadn't said out loud in years. About the 5 years of tomorrows I gave to someone who never planned to stay. About the nights spent wondering what I could have done differently. About the quiet rage that sometimes still curled in my gut when I thought about Sienna's laughter as I drove away. Delilah listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer easy platitudes. When I finally ran out of words, she reached over and took my hand in hers. Simple, certain, grounding. "You deserve to be loved where you're celebrated," she said softly, not tolerated. The words hit something raw and aching deep inside me. I didn't realize how badly I needed to hear them until that moment. How much I had twisted myself over the years, trying to be small enough, patient enough, good enough for someone who had already decided I wasn't what she wanted. With Delilah, there was no tightrope to walk, no invisible test to pass. I could just be. For the first time in a decade, I believed it might be possible. That maybe I wasn't too broken. That maybe being left behind wasn't the end of the story, it was just the beginning of a new chapter. One I would write on my own terms, with my own hands, on the porch of a crumbling house that I would make strong again. And this time, I wouldn't be chasing someone else's dreams. This time, I would be living mine. Back in the city, the life Sienna had fought so hard to build was beginning to unravel, thread by thread, while I was learning how to breathe again. Of course, I didn't know it then. I had stopped checking, stopped wondering. In my mind, she had gotten everything she ever wanted, the degree, the freedom, the fresh start without me weighing her down. I imagined her thriving, smiling that dazzling smile she used to flash when she talked about her future. I figured she had erased me the way a teacher wipes a chalkboard clean, quick and efficient, no trace of what had been written before. I was wrong. Sienna's world wasn't the glossy fairy tale she had envisioned. The new life she crafted with such precision quickly started to show its cracks. Rachel, her so-called best friend, the one who toasted my exit with a glass of champagne, turned out to be less of a support system and more of a wrecking ball. Partying every night, dragging Sienna into scene after scene she had no real stomach for. Nights that started with laughter and ended with shame. Mornings spent scrubbing at regret with coffee and sunglasses and 1,000 whispered lies about how this was all just a phase, just a little fun before real life began. Then there was Carla, her mother, whose constant hovering and judging only amplified every little failure Sienna tried to hide. Carla didn't see a daughter carving out her independence. She saw an extension of herself, a trophy she could parade at brunches and charity events. Every mistake Sienna made, every job application that was ignored, every relationship that fizzled, became another lecture, another reminder that she wasn't living up to the image her mother had painted for her. The applause Sienna had craved so desperately started sounding hollow when it came with conditions and criticism buried underneath the praise. Even the job she finally landed wasn't what she imagined. Nursing, once her dream, turned into 12-hour shifts of thankless patients, arrogant doctors, and endless paperwork. The scrubs weren't glamorous. The pay wasn't life-changing. The reality didn't match the fantasy she had sacrificed so much for. She watched other nurses smile when they clocked out and realized she couldn't remember the last time she felt joy. Not real joy. The kind that bubbles up from somewhere deep and pure. Her days blurred into a cycle of exhaustion and resentment, and the pride she had worn on graduation day dulled under the weight of repetition and loneliness. Loneliness, that was the worst part. The men she dated were a carousel of the same smiling faces, the same empty promises. None of them stayed long. None of them really knew her. Not the way I had known her, back when she was still the girl who cried over bad grades and dreamed of saving lives. She traded gold for glitter, and when the glitter blew away in the wind, she was left standing in the ashes, wondering when everything had gone so wrong. One night, rummaging through a drawer she hadn't touched in years, she found an old photo. It was us, standing in front of the apartment on the day we signed the lease, beaming like idiots, holding a set of keys between us like it was Excalibur. I had one arm slung around her shoulders, and she was laughing, a real, unguarded laugh that crinkled her nose and made her eyes shine. The sight of it hit her like a freight train. For the first time in a long time, she sat down and really looked at it. Not the surface, but the layers underneath. She remembered the man who worked 3 jobs so she could study. The man who kissed her knuckles before every exam and waited outside the hospital after clinical rotations with a thermos of hot chocolate. The man who believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. And slowly, horrifyingly, she realized she had thrown it away. Not for a better life. Not for happiness. But for an illusion. She had mistaken ambition for fulfillment, freedom for happiness. And in the process, she had betrayed the only person who had ever truly stood beside her without asking for anything in return. That night, surrounded by empty wine glasses and unopened mail, she cried harder than she ever had before. She wasn't crying for the life she thought she lost. She was crying for the man she had left standing at the door with a heart full of loyalty and a bouquet of crushed roses. For the first time, she wasn't angry at me. She wasn't resentful. She was ashamed. But shame is a funny thing. It doesn't come with a clear path to redemption. It festers. It eats away at your sleep, your smile, your reflection in the mirror. It makes you do desperate things, like pick up your phone and scroll through old numbers, praying you hadn't deleted the one person you swore you'd never need again. Sienna realized too late that love like mine didn't come around twice. That sometimes, when you burn a bridge, you don't just lose the path back. You lose the right to even look across the river. Meanwhile, back in Ashwood Creek, I was living my quiet life, unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon. I wasn't spending my nights mourning what I lost anymore. I wasn't chasing ghosts. I was building something real, with my hands, with my heart. I was learning that sometimes survival isn't about holding on. It's about letting go. And in letting go, I was finding pieces of myself I thought had been buried forever. I wasn't the man who staggered out of that apartment with his world in boxes. I was someone new, someone stronger, someone Sienna wouldn't recognize even if she tried. And soon enough, she would try. It started with a ripple, not a wave. A few missed calls. A handful of emails I didn't recognize. At first, I thought little of it. Ashwood Creek wasn't the kind of place that attracted strangers, and I was careful about who I gave my number to. The messages weren't direct. No names, no explanations, just a series of vague attempts to reach me. I ignored them all. I had learned the hard way that sometimes silence was the only defense you needed. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known then, was that a search had begun. Somewhere in that polished apartment back in the city, Sienna had realized I wasn't just waiting around for her to come back. I wasn't sitting by the window, pining for the woman who had used me as a stepping stone. I was gone, really gone, and it rattled her more than she expected. The first person she tried to reach was Jasper. My brother had always been easier to find than I was, and if anyone knew where I had disappeared to, it would have been him. But Sienna was a few years too late. Jasper had moved to California, chasing his own dreams, far from the wreckage I left behind. When she called, he didn't answer. When she texted, he replied with 2 words, "Not my problem." It didn't take her long to figure out that the usual ways of finding people, mutual friends, old neighbors, were dead ends. Most of the people who once knew me had either moved on or hadn't heard from me in years. I had made sure of that. When I left, I didn't just pack up my things. I packed up my entire existence. No breadcrumbs. No forwarding address. I didn't want to be found. Not by her. Not by anyone. Desperation must have crept in then, turning into a frantic, blind scramble. She turned to social media, trawling through Facebook groups, LinkedIn profiles, any digital footprint she could find. It didn't take her long to stumble across the diner's page, Gus's Diner, the old name still lingering in the metadata. Except now, it wasn't Gus's anymore. It was the Second Chance Cafe. New name, new owners, new life. She messaged the page, hoping whoever ran it could lead her to me. She probably imagined me still washing dishes in the back, still stuck in the same small loop of existence she had discarded. But the page was managed by Gus's niece now, and she didn't recognize Sienna's name, didn't know my story. She ignored the message. Another dead end. Frustrated, Sienna got in her car and drove to my parents' old neighborhood. The house she had once visited for Sunday dinners was gone, sold to a family with 3 kids and a dog that barked at her when she knocked. Strangers answered the door, giving her polite but wary smiles before shaking their heads. No Marcus Hale here. No one by that name. No one who cared. The panic bloomed full force then, wrapping around her throat like a vice. It's funny how you can walk away from someone thinking you've won, only to realize later that you were the one who lost everything that mattered. She thought she had all the time in the world. That if she ever wanted, she could just turn around and I'd be there, waiting like some loyal, broken thing too stupid to realize he deserved better. But the man she left behind wasn't waiting anymore. He was living. Back in Ashwood Creek, I had no idea of the chaos unraveling miles away. I was too busy sanding down the frame of an old Harley, grease staining my hands, the smell of oil and sun-warmed metal filling the air. Life was simple here. Honest. If I wasn't working at the bike shop, I was at the diner or tinkering with the house, slowly turning it from a sagging wreck into a place that felt like a home. Delilah's laughter often drifted through my days now, a low, easy sound that warmed places inside me I thought had permanently gone cold. She never pressed when I seemed lost in thought, never tried to fix what wasn't broken. She just stood beside me, silent and steady, while I learned how to be a man who didn't define himself by the love he lost. If Sienna's search had a soundtrack, it would have been the frantic pounding of keys against a laptop, the shrill, unanswered ringing of phones, the hollow click of messages sent and ignored. The harder she searched, the more she realized how completely I had slipped through her fingers. And with every dead end, the truth grew harder to ignore. She hadn't just lost me. She had lost the version of herself that mattered. The man she discarded wasn't broken anymore. He wasn't limping after her shadow. He wasn't begging to be seen. He had disappeared into a life better, quieter, stronger than the one she traded him for. When her desperation finally curdled into panic, she did what all desperate people do. She tried harder, grasping at anything that might lead her back to what she didn't appreciate until it was too late. Old acquaintances, old numbers, even random chance meetings in the city, she cast her net wide, hoping for a miracle. But miracles are for the faithful, and Sienna had abandoned faith the minute she signed those papers with a champagne toast. And somewhere deep inside, she must have started to understand the most terrifying truth of all. Sometimes when you burn a bridge, it doesn't just collapse behind you. Sometimes it collapses beneath your own feet too. Meanwhile, I lived each day without her ghost shadowing my steps, without her laughter haunting my dreams, without the weight of wondering when she would realize what she lost. I didn't know the storm was coming. I didn't know how close it already was. But even if I had, I wouldn't have flinched. Because when you build a life from ashes, you stop fearing the fire. The first thing I noticed that Thursday afternoon was the rain. It came down hard and fast, drumming against the roof of the Second Chance Cafe with a steady, relentless rhythm. I had just finished a long shift at the bike shop. My hands still stained with oil, the ache of honest work settled deep in my bones. I didn't check my phone right away. I peeled off my damp jacket, shook the rain from my hair, and ordered a coffee at the counter from Marlene, Gus's niece, who gave me the same easy smile she always did. It wasn't until I sat down at my usual corner table, the one near the window that overlooked Main Street, that I dug into my pocket and fished out my phone. The screen lit up like a flashing red alarm, 169 missed calls. I stared at it, the numbers not making any sense at first. I scrolled through the call log. Every single one came from the same unknown number, rapid fire, sometimes minutes apart. Whoever it was, they hadn't given up easily. Curiosity won out over instinct. I thumbed the screen and called the number back. It barely rang once before it connected. Marcus. The voice on the other end was raw, shaking, almost unrecognizable. But I knew it. Some things, no matter how much you want to forget them, etch themselves into your bones. It was Sienna. For a second, I said nothing. Just sat there, the rain beating against the window, the hum of the diner around me fading into a low, distant murmur. She was sobbing, messy and loud, like the kind of crying that doesn't care who hears. She choked out, the words tumbling over each other. I made a mistake, Marcus. God, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I was stupid. I thought I knew what I wanted. Her voice cracked so hard I thought she might break in half through the phone. I need you. Please. I'll do whatever it takes. I can fix this. I can fix us. I leaned back in my chair, feeling strangely detached, like I was listening to a story about someone else's life. The desperation in her voice might have gutted me once. Months ago, maybe even weeks ago, I would have hung on every word, foolishly clinging to the hope that love could erase betrayal. But not now. Now I heard the truth buried beneath the begging, the panic of someone who realized too late that not all doors stay open forever. I didn't rush to answer. I let her fill the silence with more frantic words. Apologies. Promises. Memories she tried to string together into something that sounded like redemption. I listened. I owed her that much, maybe. Or maybe I didn't owe her a damn thing. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, steady. No anger. No hatred. Just the kind of quiet certainty that comes when you finally understand your own worth. I'm not the man you left behind anymore. The words hung there, suspended between us like a blade. I didn't elaborate. I didn't try to soften the blow. I didn't give her a roadmap back to me. Some journeys aren't meant to be retraced. There was a long, hollow pause on the other end of the line. I imagined her sitting in whatever apartment or car she was hiding in, the walls closing in around her, the realization sinking in that she couldn't just rewind the clock and erase the damage she had done. And then, before she could gather herself enough to say whatever she was about to say next, I hung up. It wasn't anger that made me do it. It was mercy. For her. For me. For the boy I had been who would have clung to the fantasy that love could heal everything if you just wanted it badly enough. That boy deserved peace, and the man I was now was finally strong enough to give it to him. I set the phone down on the table, face down, and wrapped my hands around the warm mug of coffee Marlene had set in front of me. The heat seeped into my palms, grounding me. Around me, life went on. Gus argued good-naturedly with a customer about the weather. Someone dropped a spoon and cursed under their breath. The jukebox in the corner crackled to life with an old country song about losing and finding yourself again. The rain blurred the world outside into a smear of gray and silver, but inside, I felt clear for the first time in years. Delilah slid into the seat across from me without a word, her damp hair curling around her face, a knowing look in her eyes. She must have seen something in my expression because she didn't ask what happened. Didn't need to. She just reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her touch firm and steady. I squeezed back, a small, silent thank you for her understanding. Sienna's voice echoed faintly in my memory, but it didn't hurt the way it used to. It didn't crack me open or drag me under. It was just another sound. Another closed door behind me. She had made her choice. And finally, so had I. Outside the window, the rain began to slow, the heavy drops tapering off into a soft mist. The world beyond Ashwood Creek would keep spinning, full of regrets and what-ifs and people chasing the past like ghosts they could never quite catch. But me? I wasn't chasing anything anymore. I was already home. 2 days later, the storm didn't come from the sky. It walked straight through the door of the Second Chance Cafe. It was a Saturday morning, the kind that usually hummed with slow conversation and the smell of fresh biscuits drifting through the air. I was behind the counter with Gus, wiping down mugs and chatting about the upcoming county fair, when the bell above the door jingled violently, announcing something more than just a customer. I didn't have to turn around to feel the shift in the room. Conversation stalled. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Even the jukebox seemed to stutter and fall silent. I knew before I even looked who it was. Sienna stood in the doorway, drenched from head to toe, her mascara smeared in dark tracks down her cheeks, her hair clinging wetly to her face. She wore a jacket that was far too thin for the weather, her hands trembling as she clutched a soggy purse to her chest like it might anchor her. She looked nothing like the woman who had stood in our kitchen 5 years ago, radiant and triumphant, popping a champagne cork over my broken heart. Delilah sat at the counter a few stools down, cradling a cup of tea in her hands. She turned her head slightly, registering the scene without panic, her expression calm but alert. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just watched, her presence a silent wall of strength beside me. Sienna's eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, the whole world narrowed down to just the space between us. She stumbled forward a step, her voice breaking the thick, stunned silence of the diner. "Marcus, please." She dropped to her knees on the checkered floor with a soft thud that echoed far louder than it should have. Gasps rippled through the cafe. Forks clattered onto plates. Someone whispered a sharp curse under their breath. She crawled toward me, clutching at my hand where it rested on the counter, her fingers cold and trembling. Tears mixed with the rain on her face, making her look almost childlike in her desperation. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, voice ragged. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. I was stupid. I was selfish. She hiccuped, gasping for air. "I thought I needed to find myself, but I only lost everything that mattered." The diner was deathly still, everyone holding their breath, waiting to see what I would do. Gus leaned against the doorway to the kitchen, arms crossed, his mouth tugged up in a wry smile that said he had seen 100 tragedies play out before, and this one wouldn't break the world. I knelt down beside her, not because I wanted to soothe her, but because I needed her to hear me, to see me, without the barrier of height or distance. I looked into her eyes, the same eyes I had once memorized, the same ones I had once sworn to protect, and I saw nothing but the wreckage of choices she couldn't undo. I spoke softly, so only she could hear over the quiet murmur of stunned diners. "You taught me how to be invisible," I said, my voice low and steady. "You taught me that loyalty, sacrifice, love, they didn't matter if they weren't convenient for you." She shook her head fiercely, mouthing no over and over again, but I kept going. I needed her to understand this wasn't anger talking. It was clarity. "You made me a ghost," I said. "Now you'll learn how it feels." I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. I could feel Delilah's steady gaze, like a tether keeping me grounded. Sienna stayed on her knees, looking up at me with a shattered expression, reaching out one last time like a drowning woman grasping for a lifeline. But I had no lifelines left to give her. Without breaking eye contact, I walked over to Delilah. She set her tea down and rose to meet me without hesitation. I reached for her hand, the same hand that had held mine through rebuilding days and long, silent nights. The hand that never demanded anything but gave everything freely. I lifted her hand to my lips and kissed it gently, reverently, in front of everyone, in front of Sienna. The meaning was clear. This was my life now. This was where my loyalty, my love, belonged. Delilah smiled softly, squeezing my hand in return, not to mark territory or claim a victory, but simply to remind me that I wasn't alone anymore. That I didn't have to carry old wounds like battle medals. Sienna let out a low, broken sob that seemed to shatter against the walls of the diner. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. As I led Delilah toward the door, the rest of the diner began to buzz with movement again, forks scraping plates, conversations picking up awkwardly. Life, refusing to pause for one woman's regret. Gus tipped his imaginary hat to me as I passed, a silent salute I understood without needing to hear the words. Outside, the rain had eased into a fine mist, soft and almost forgiving. I helped Delilah into my truck, climbing in beside her. For a moment, we sat there in the quiet, the windows fogging slightly from the heat of our breathing. Delilah rested her head against my shoulder. "You okay?" she murmured. I thought about it. Really thought about it. About the years I spent loving someone who couldn't love me back. About the nights I wondered if I would ever feel whole again. About the long, brutal climb out of the pit Sienna had left me in. I turned my head, pressing a kiss to Delilah's temple. "I'm better than okay," I said. "I'm free." As I started the engine and pulled away from the diner, from the wreckage of a life that wasn't mine anymore, I realized something that made me smile. Some ghosts aren't meant to haunt you forever. Some ghosts are meant to teach you how to live again. Life didn't snap back into place like a rubber band after that day. It didn't miraculously erase the years I spent trying to make myself small enough for someone else's dreams. Healing wasn't a straight road in Ashwood Creek. It was winding, full of little detours and unexpected stops, but it was mine. Every scar, every crack in my heart, every rough edge I'd once tried to sand down for the sake of someone else's comfort, none of it needed to be hidden anymore. Delilah and I built a life together the way a craftsman builds a house, not in a rush, not with cheap shortcuts, but with careful hands and a steady patience that neither of us had ever truly been given before. She didn't complete me. She didn't fill some missing piece. She walked beside me, and that was enough. We were two whole people who chose each other, day after day, without needing to be anyone but ourselves. The day we got married, we didn't rent a fancy venue or plan some extravagant ceremony. We stood beneath the sprawling oak tree behind the cafe, the one that had shaded so many quiet conversations and tired mornings. Gus officiated with a battered Bible in one hand and a mischievous twinkle in his eye, half reading, half making it up as he went along. The whole town showed up, Marlene from the diner, Vernon and his construction crew, even the mayor, who gave us a confused but heartfelt blessing between bites of barbecue. Delilah wore a simple dress, white cotton that fluttered around her legs in the breeze. I wore the only suit I owned, one Gus had insisted on pressing himself the night before. There were no bridesmaids, no groomsmen, no fancy flower arrangements. Just us, standing under that tree, promising each other not perfection, not fantasy, but the kind of love that grows in real soil with roots strong enough to weather any storm. When she said, "I do," it wasn't a performance. It wasn't a script rehearsed 100 times. It was a promise spoken with a quiet certainty that made my chest ache in the best way possible. When I slid the ring onto her finger, my hands didn't shake. They were steady, sure. I knew what I was giving, and I knew what I was receiving. Not a dream. Not a lie. A life. Afterward, we danced barefoot on the grass, Gus playing old records on a cranky portable player that skipped every third song. Children ran between tables piled high with fried chicken, pies, and jugs of sweet tea. It wasn't the wedding I once imagined as a younger man, grand and polished and perfect. It was better. It was ours. I opened a motorcycle repair shop that summer, in a little brick building a few blocks from the cafe. It smelled like oil, metal, and hope. I spent my days rebuilding engines and mentoring young men from town who needed someone to believe in them the way Gus once believed in me. Kids with too much anger in their fists and too little guidance in their lives. I taught them how to use a wrench, how to respect a machine, how to take pride in something they built with their own hands. In the quiet hours between jobs, I sat on the front steps of the shop, sipping coffee, listening to the sound of the town breathing around me. I didn't need noise anymore. I didn't need constant motion. I had learned the beauty of a still life, of a simple life, of a life lived fully in the moments most people rush through. Every so often, I would catch a glimpse of Sienna's number flashing across my phone screen. No name, just the digits burned into my memory like a brand. I never answered. Never blocked it either. I didn't need to. Her calls weren't a threat. They were echoes, fading reminders of a life I had already buried with my own two hands. Sometimes, when the sun dipped low and painted the sky in bruised golds and deep blues, I thought about her. About the boy I used to be. About the man I had become. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't pity her either. I simply understood something she never could. Some goodbyes are meant to last forever. Not because of anger. Not because of vengeance. Because letting go is an act of love too. Love for yourself. Love for the life that still waits beyond the ashes. Delilah would come sit beside me on the steps, her camera slung over her shoulder, the scent of wildflowers clinging to her skin. She'd lean her head against my shoulder and ask, without asking, if I was okay. And I always was. More than okay. I was free. I was home. I was finally, the man I was always meant to become. Under the open sky of Ashwood Creek, with calloused hands and a heart stitched back together one day at a time, I built something no one could take from me again. A life. A love. A forever that belonged to me.